This story's heroine wanted a fresh start, but things weren't exactly going her way. A kid named Caleb, with silver hair and red eyes, got super attached to her, which, screamed, "He's a Duke's kid." And he was begging Aaliyah not to divorce his older brother, Cedric Indigenia, who just walked in the room. Aaliyah and Cedric had a contract marriage, and it was coming to an end. But Caleb didn't want his sister-in-law to leave, and started making up all kinds of reasons for her to stay. Like, without her, Cedric would be a total mess, because he's so clumsy he cut his finger. And the kid was scared to sleep alone, convinced there was a monster hiding under his bed. But Caleb's spirit was actually the strongest in the whole damn universe. And the monster under his bed? It's some major evil that became his power. This young Duke's gotta become a gravity wizard and a master of darkness. And while he was begging Aaliyah to stay, his brother told him to quit whining, because she's already in a tough spot. The girl saw a clear intention in her husband's eyes to get the kid out of the room, and held him closer so he wouldn't be scared. But Cedric just grabbed his brother by the scruff of his neck, like a disobedient kitten, and pulling him away from his wife, he explained that his actions and pleading weren't gonna change anything anyway. The boy naturally got pissed, making a disgruntled face, and broke free from his older brother's grip. Then, in a lecturing tone, he chewed Cedric out, calling him the biggest idiot in the world, and demanded they don't ditch Aaliyah, but the older brother didn't want to either. But that's just how things had to be. Aaliyah herself got sick of this bickering and yelled at both of them to shut their traps, right now. She had no clue what was up with these brothers and why they were starting a fight out of nowhere. It all kicked off when our girl woke up in a totally different body and stared into the mirror, completely lost. At first, she figured it was a dream, so she blinked, shook her head, the whole deal, but nothing changed. The girl realized she was stuck inside the character of a novel she'd read, but she couldn't remember a thing about it. She finally got some intel when she found a diary and learned she was now Aaliyah, a 23-year-old. And since the author barely wrote about her, she was probably just some side character, But with nothing better to do, the girl decided to look around. And all she saw out the window was forest. It was kinda romantic, actually. Birds singing, a cool breeze on her face. The weather was awesome, so Aaliyah decided to take a walk through this crazy world she'd landed in. Sitting under a tree, she tried to figure out again just who this character she was inhabiting even was. Nothing came to mind, so she decided not to sweat it. After all, it's awesome here, and not everyone gets a second shot at life, even in a different body. The girl continued exploring the forest, trusting that nothing bad would happen. Along the way, she saw all sorts of cute little critters that looked so adorable she wanted to pet them. But they wouldn't let her touch them and ran off immediately. That didn't bother Aaliyah, though. She was just happy to be breathing fresh air and walking through such a beautiful forest again. Suddenly, she heard someone scream, like someone was running from something. Turning around, Aaliyah saw a boy being chased by a wolf that was easily twice his size. Aaliyah's first instinct was to save the kid, and she yelled at him to hide behind her. The boy thought her request was a little weird, since she was just a girl, and not very tall at that. But she told him to hide again, even though she was scared shitless herself. Still, she couldn't just abandon this sweet kid, so she decided to try and scare the wolf off. Gathering all her courage to protect the child, Aaliyah, knowing she could die again, glared angrily at the predator, which looked terrifying. Its red eyes seemed to reflect the anger of the whole world, and with sharp fangs, it was ready to sink into human skin. Aaliyah's soul went running for the hills again, but then she noticed the wolf was leaping like in slow motion. She decided to seize the chance and, using a technique, kicked him right in the gut. The wolf flew sideways and crashed to the ground, but after that, it didn't move. Aaliyah was surprised at herself, not believing she'd become strong enough to knock out a beast like that in one shot. Either way, the predator's done for, and now the boy is safe. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief and admit to the little guy that she was super scared too. And that guy, cool as a cucumber, just thanked her for saving his hide. He promised he'd pay her back for it, no doubt. But later, because he was strapped for cash right now. Just then, taking a closer look at the kid's face, Aaliyah remembered her little brother, who looked a lot like him. This little dude was a dead ringer for her brother, Uni. The girl even wondered if he'd also transmigrated into the novel, but in his own body, even though that seemed impossible. But then the rescued kid butted in, saying his name wasn't Uni. He was the Grand Duke from the Apresent Imperial family, and his name was Caleb Indigenia. Aaliyah was a bit shocked, but now the pieces in her head started clicking into place. She remembered that this kid was the embodiment of the novel's dark side she'd read. Back in her past life, she only had her brother Uni, who had to spend his time in the hospital because of some rare disease. But he took his treatment like a champ, and his sister, being on the national taekwondo team, promised her brother she'd snag that gold medal, and he was totally stoked about it. Time flew by, and then the day came. She actually won the freaking golden medal, They were both over the moon, stoked that everything worked out, and they wouldn't have to sweat the cash. She was dreaming of sending him to the best hospital. But for Yoonhee, it was his last day. It was a devastating blow for our girl. Turns out, the doc knew he didn't have much time left, but the kid begged them not to tell his sister. And after losing her brother, she started drowning herself in all kinds of media. She became a total internet junkie, just trying to escape reality. Then one day, she randomly stumbled across an ad for a web novel that looked interesting, and she started reading. The cover grabbed her attention. There was this face of darkness among the people, and it was a dead ringer for Yoonhee. That's why she instantly got hooked on the novel. And now that face was right in front of her. Caleb figured she saved him, cause she mistook him for some Yoonhee guy, and apologized for not being him. But even his voice was the same as her little brother's, from her past life. And this kid didn't look evil now. He even promised that, for saving him, she could ask for anything she wanted. He added he was a little hurt. Otherwise, he would have handled the wolf himself with magic. The fact that the little guy was injured really got Aaliyah worried. Only then did she notice blood on his hand, and got super scared, even though the wound was minor. She took his hand to examine it, and saw some other red spots on his palm. Anyway, she suggested going back to her nearby cabin, so she could bandage up his wound. First, she bandaged his hand with a handkerchief, and he thanked her again. Then she pointed out the way they needed to go, but noticed the kid was limping a little. He probably twisted his ankle running from that predator, but Caleb insisted he wasn't hurt at all. That didn't really reassure her, and she told him to let her know if it started hurting. The little guy even felt a bit embarrassed that he was in this state in front of the lady. From the outside, it might have looked like Aaliyah was scolding him, but she was just worried about him. Just then, she remembered something from the novel. Caleb was experiencing some kind of deficit. For some reason, the vassals didn't like him, and always held him to super strict standards. But the girl only saw a sweet kid and didn't understand why others hated him. The original novel didn't explore the reason for that. With standards like that, the kid's probably crushed, even if he is from a duke's family. Aaliyah just wanted to take care of him. He's just a kid, surrounded by a bunch of jerks, and when he said he wasn't hurt, it just brought back memories of her brother, Yoonhee, saying the same thing. She turned her back to him and crouched down, telling him to hop on. Caleb didn't get what she was doing at first, so she explained she'd carry him because his legs were messed up. Again, the kid started insisting he wasn't in pain and could walk on his own, just like Yoonhee used to swear he wasn't hurting when he walked by himself. Looking at Caleb, Aaliyah just said she wanted to help, and there was no shame in that. She told him to think of her as his sister, and there's nothing wrong with a little brother getting a piggyback ride from his sis. Later, staring at his bandaged fingers, Caleb wished he had a magic wand to heal himself, and she even gave him a cup of hot cocoa, using the last of her cocoa powder. She just poured herself some plain water, because there wasn't enough for seconds. The kid thanked her again for taking care of him, and Aaliyah just adored this child, living in a world that was about to get swallowed by fear. But then she got curious about why she was even with Caleb in the first place. I mean, he's the main character, and she's just a sidekick. But right now, the important thing is for him to get better. And while she was watching the kid sip his cocoa, his stomach suddenly let out a loud growl. Realizing he was starving but wouldn't admit it, she started scolding him again without even meaning to, especially when he told her he'd been wandering around the forest since dawn. And it was already 5 in the afternoon. Now her mission was to feed Caleb, but she was surprised when he admitted he doesn't eat dinner. This kid was trying not to gain weight, so he'd look good at events, because that's what his teacher told him. Aaliyah thought they were just messing with the kid. He's still a child, and they're already cutting his food. She felt like offing the jerk who put a kid on such a strict diet. But now she understood why Caleb felt so light when she was carrying him. Telling Caleb to hold up a sec, Aaliyah started cooking something, mentally cursing that scumbag teacher. All she had in the house was potatoes, but she managed to whip up a few dishes with them. She felt kind of bad that she couldn't give the kid something tastier, and he was just amazed that she managed to cook everything so fast, like she was using magic. Aaliyah was just used to doing it after all this time, and told the little guy to dig in already. And during dinner, for like 20 minutes, she kept telling Caleb to ignore the teacher and eat up. Caleb thought the food was pretty good, though it had more pepper than he was used to. Then the girl offered the kid some potato chips. Judging by his face, he'd never even seen them before. Caleb agreed to try them, but asked her not to spoon feed him. And while he was chewing, Aaliyah watched with admiration, seeing how much he enjoyed it. He really thought the taste was incredible and unforgettable. The girl promised to make some later, but she'd need to go get the ingredients the next day. As evening approached, Caleb drifted off to sleep. When he opened his eyes the next morning, the sun was already high, and he panicked, thinking he'd overslept. Then he got confused when he didn't see familiar walls, and looking around, realized he was still in Aaliyah's house. Even so, the boy didn't think he should sleep that long, though he was glad his body got some rest. He couldn't believe he'd actually fallen asleep like that. After that one incident, he couldn't sleep a single night. Not since that day some psycho committed that messed up murder. Just then, Aaliyah got back, a sack slung over her shoulder, hoping Caleb got some shut-eye. The girl didn't want to wake him early, and she'd already managed to run out for groceries. And today, she was planning on making the little guest a killer meat stew for lunch. Rubbing his eyes, Caleb started remembering how Aaliyah saved him from that vicious wolf yesterday. She took it down with one hit, and she can even heal wounds. This young lady seemed simple, but at the same time, she was enchanting and looked like a little angel. Caleb also liked that she was a good cook, and he wanted to get to know her better. But if he starts asking questions, Aaliyah will start asking questions too, and he didn't want to talk about himself. All the kid did was ask her to wake him up early tomorrow if he oversleeps again. He explained that he couldn't get up late, but that struck Aaliyah as weird, so she started pressing him about the reason why. I mean, she doesn't have any schedule here, and she doesn't see anything wrong with a kid getting enough sleep. Her house ain't some grand duchy, so while Caleb's her guest, he doesn't need to stick to those dumb rules. Here, he's just a regular kid who can chill, eat, play, or sleep as much as he wants. The boy seemed a little flustered, and Aaliyah patted him on the head, telling him not to be afraid to goof off like a normal kid. In that moment, the boy saw this woman as a total hero. In that short amount of time, he'd learned about so many of her talents, and she was still super nice. Plus, no one had ever petted him like that before. Then Aaliyah told him to wash up and come sit down to eat. He still couldn't believe he could just be a normal kid, not a duke with a ton of responsibilities. He was constantly told to act like an adult, and they'd whack his hands with a ruler if he misbehaved. And that made him think he shouldn't do the things Aaliyah told him to. But her words made him happy, even when she made him chamomile tea instead of cocoa. He really liked the food she made today too, and Aaliyah was just happy she could satisfy the kid's appetite. Caleb was starting to get all these feelings, and this girl seemed incredible, which he told her. And because the kid looked like Yoonhee, it felt like she'd known him for years. Right then, Caleb really wanted to tell her all about himself, and also learn more about her. It was a simple request, but Aaliyah didn't know how to tell him about herself, so she asked him to tell his life story first. Aaliyah had read a novel about him, but she was curious to hear it from him directly, without giving herself away. She also wanted to do something to prevent Caleb from becoming a villain. The boy's face suddenly turned sad, but he started anyway. The girl confirmed he had an older brother, who she'd read a lot about in the original story. At 10, Cedric was adopted by the Indigentia family, and he mastered gravity magic at 13. He became the strongest in the world and revived magic that had vanished over a century ago. And even though they weren't blood-related, Caleb really grew to love Cedric. Right then, the boy's face turned dead serious, and he confessed that his brother had been cursed last year. They say only the caster can lift the curse, but unfortunately, they still can't find him. A fairy curse in Aaliyah, what's that all about? That's probably why Caleb is turning into the face of darkness. The original novel mentions Daphne, the patron saint of the Marinist family, and Prince Reno from the Aprazan Empire. One day, a fairy appeared before Reno, intending to send him into an eternal sleep. This fairy began to cast a spell on him, so that the prince would sleep forever. At that moment, Daphne appears before Reno and deflects the curse with her magic. And then, when she protected him from the evil fairy, Daphne and Reno fell in love. Now, when Caleb was talking about his brother's curse, he stated that there is a way to lift it. The Sanctuary of Knowledge. Only authorized personnel can enter this place. The Pillars of the Empire, the Malaishat, Marinest, and Indigentia families. Besides, only the heads of the family, or heirs who've sworn loyalty to the family, can get in. The quickest way for Cedric to enter the Knowledge Sanctuary is to become Grand Duke himself. But he doesn't want the throne and wants Caleb to become Grand Duke instead. The kid's okay with doing it for his brother, but he's worried he won't be able to lift the curse. Still, he promised he'd do everything he could to get into the Knowledge Sanctuary. Aaliyah remembered that when Caleb becomes Grand Duke, Cedric's condition will get a lot worse. That kid's gonna get into that sanctuary real fast, and he'll dig through every piece of info he can find. But he won't find anything about the fairy or the curse. Then, one day, he'll be told that the fairy was captured alive by the Imperial Court, and Caleb will race to the dungeon where they're keeping her. He knew she was the only one who could lift the curse on his brother, but he never got to talk to her. By the time he arrived, the fairy had mysteriously died. After that, Caleb would become convinced there was a conspiracy within the royal family. He'd lose all trust, filled with hate, and, heartbroken over his brother's illness, he'd want to destroy them. Caleb would turn to forbidden black magic and make a pact with a great devil. Once that happens, there's no way anyone can stop him. With a heavy heart, Aaliyah remembered the whole story, the one that was about to unfold. But right now, she was just looking at a kid, one who looked so much like her brother. And the girl decided that as long as Caleb was in this hut, she'd do everything she could to change the future. Hugging the boy, Aaliyah assured him that he would become a great duke and save his brother. She promised to help him with anything and everything she could. That night, she fell asleep next to him, holding him like a caring older sister. She believed everything would be okay, and she kept trying to instill that belief in him for the next week. Then, one day, they went for a walk in the woods, making flower crowns and playing like regular kids. Now, looking at his face, she could tell Caleb had changed. The kid mostly laughed and enjoyed every single fun moment. The cruelty was gone. He smiled more often, and his emotions felt real. That's what a normal kid should look like. Then, Caleb caught a rabbit and brought it to Aaliyah, asking what he should do with it now. It was the same bunny that Aaliyah couldn't catch a week ago, and she was happy to see it again. But seeing her face, the little critter suddenly freaked out, wriggled free, and bolted again. The girl couldn't figure out why it only ran from her, like there was something terrifying to rabbits on her face. But she explained to Caleb that the animal just got spooked because she approached it so fast. Then she suggested they head back to the cabin for a snack, and reached out her hand to the boy. He eagerly reached back, and Aaliyah noticed his wounds were almost healed. He'd been with her for several days now, and soon he'd have to return to the duchy. Just like me, Aaliyah found it weird that after all this time, Caleb's not being looked for by his brother, or anyone for that matter. Meanwhile, Cedric was standing by his bedroom window late at night, wondering where his brother was right now. The truth is, he was searching for his brother, throwing everything he had into finding him. Suddenly, winter arrived, and the whole duchy was covered in fluffy snow. Cedric got a warning from the royal family to stop using weather magic. His advisor, Edwin Polanoa, also reported that the gates are snowed shut and the vassals can't get out. And if this keeps up, the castle and farmland are going to take a serious hit. The Duke claimed he's got it all under control, and he just needs to clear a few things up. So, if Edwin wants to stop the blizzard, he needs to find Caleb. Basically, he dumped all the responsibility on his servant. Cedric thought it was weird that after a whole week, they had 0 leads, and didn't even know if his brother was alive. And it pissed him off that the vassals only cared about the weather, like it was more important than the little Duke's life. He ordered them to bring Caleb to him as soon as possible, and he doesn't care how they find him, even if every last vassal freezes to death. Head bowed, the advisor promised to carry out the order. Left alone, Cedric griped about his vassals, whining about the cold, while his brother was missing. He couldn't stand just waiting around for him to come back, and prayed he was still alive. He'd even hit up the Empire's info guilds, but they hadn't found a single trace. There was only one guild left he hadn't gone to, the Dark Guild. Meanwhile, Caleb was hanging out with Aaliyah. As they were getting ready for bed again, the girl asked him to come over so she could change his bandage. She needed to do it often so it wouldn't get worse, and the wound would heal faster. Aaliyah quickly tied on a fresh piece of bandage, noticing the wound really was healing fast. In a few more days, Aaliyah was sure the kid would make a full recovery. Caleb looked at the bandage on his fingers, and for some reason, got bummed out. The look on his face was so sad, like he'd lost something incredibly precious. That's because he didn't want to go back to the duchy so soon. But Aaliyah didn't either. She just wanted his hand to heal quickly. Then they started getting ready for bed. The kid suddenly turned to the lady of the house. He wanted to tell her something important, but then changed his mind and told her not to worry about it. But the girl kinda knew what he was thinking. She'd been watching him the whole time. And when they went to sleep, Caleb was thinking about how soon he'd be able to use magic and get back to the duchy. He knew it was the right thing to do, the way it had to be, and even though he didn't want to, he had to go back to his brother. Caleb remembered telling Cedric that if he became Archduke, he could prove his loyalty and enter the Temple of Knowledge. The kid couldn't wrap his head around why his brother was turning down the title, but he didn't want it and wished for his little brother to lead the family. The little guy needed time for that, but he wanted to lift Cedric's curse right now. But Cedric told him not to worry about it. There was another way, and he didn't have to go to the Temple of Knowledge. Later, Caleb overheard the maids whispering that Lord Cedric was going to get married. It was weird news for everyone, like it would somehow save his life. But even the maids believed that only the Temple of Knowledge could save the young lord. And now, Cedric was giving up the title, and he could only prove his loyalty to the family through marriage. But finding him a wife would be super tough, because of all the rumors going around. They say the curse is contagious, and that news totally freaked Caleb out. No clue who started these rumors, but one thing's for sure, nobody's gonna want to marry Cedric now. Caleb couldn't figure out why his brother hadn't told him any of this. Like he didn't want to involve him, or just didn't trust him. He just wanted Cedric to be honest with him and not keep secrets. Then, his thoughts went back to Aaliyah, and he pictured her becoming a couple with his brother. They'd actually look amazing together, from the outside. Plus, that girl's super kind and has tons of talents. She'd be perfect for Cedric. Now the kid had this hope that Aaliyah could help his brother if they got married. Then he could prove his loyalty, get into the Temple of Knowledge, and find a way to lift the curse. After that, they could all live together, and Caleb would never feel lonely again. But then the kid realized he shouldn't even be thinking about stuff like that, because it made him look like a total egomaniac, and he was terrified he'd end up alone forever. He didn't want to mess up this girl's life, so he swore he'd be back the minute his arm healed. He drifted off thinking about it, but all night he dreamed about him, Cedric, and Aaliyah living as one big family. The next day, Aaliyah asked him what he wanted for lunch, promising to whip up something tasty. But Caleb was in a super dark mood, and he just didn't care. Seeing how bummed he was, the girl freaked out, not knowing what could have upset the little dude so much. Then it hit her. He'd been acting like this since morning, and she hadn't even noticed. Aaliyah was clueless what to do, but she wasn't about to give up either, and she announced to Caleb that she was making a spiced potato soup for lunch. Plus, she needed a few lemons for it, and she asked the kid to go pick some. With a face like a kicked puppy, Caleb agreed to do what she asked. But Aaliyah noticed his steps were so heavy and unsteady, like he was about to collapse. A walk in the fresh air should cheer him up, so she planned to take him out later. But then, out of nowhere, just as Caleb reached the door, some dude in a hooded cloak walked in. She got scared for the kid, because this guy looked seriously creepy, and then he started reaching for him, saying he'd finally found him. Oh, hell no. Aaliyah wasn't born yesterday. She clocked the freeloader upside the head with a frying pan. She didn't like the way this dude was looking at Caleb, and especially that he just barged in without knocking. The guy looked super suspicious, and Aaliyah figured he was there to snatch the kid. She swung the frying pan again to chase the stranger off when she heard him call Caleb his brother. So the kid walks up to him, asks if he's all right. I mean, duh, getting clocked in the head with a cast iron skillet ain't no joke. Most people would be down for the count. And Aaliyah was totally freaked, realizing who she'd just whacked with her cookware. The hit was seriously powerful, and even though Cedric tried to stay upright, he still passed out. Aaliyah felt bad, but she had no clue who was under that hood. She got the Duke into bed to recover, while Caleb, seeing how scared Aaliyah was, kept saying it wasn't her fault. Anyone would have done the same, and the kid even promised to explain everything to his brother when he woke up. At the same time, Caleb wasn't expecting his brother to track him down so quickly. Things were getting a little awkward, so to buy some time, the kid went to grab a wet towel. The girl stayed behind to look after the guy who'd just gotten knocked out. She thought Caleb mumbled something before heading into the kitchen. That's when she heard a faint moan nearby. Cedric was starting to wake up, so Aaliyah decided to grab a compress herself, leaving Caleb to watch over his brother. But then she noticed the Duke was still unconscious, like just talking in his sleep. Aaliyah noticed his tight collar and decided to unbutton it so he could breathe easier. The second she touched the buttons, Cedric instantly grabbed her hand. Opening his eyes, the young master demanded an explanation for what she was about to do. Caught off guard and a little scared, Aaliyah froze, not knowing what to say. And Cedric thought she was some kind of pervert trying to take advantage of him. That totally shocked her, because she was just trying to help. The young master kept grilling her about her motives, but it sounded loaded, you know? And then he straight up asked why she'd kidnapped Caleb. The girl choked on her words, surprised and freaked out. This dude was accusing her of something she didn't even do. On top of that, he thought she'd set up some kind of barrier to keep him from finding this place. That's when Aaliyah found her voice again, yelling that he had it all wrong. Then she spun around, ready to go get Caleb real quick. But BAM! Something slammed her to the floor like a super strong magnet, and she couldn't even wiggle a finger. Cedric, figuring she was trying to bolt, used some gravity magic and pinned her to the ground. And even though she kept insisting she wasn't running, it didn't seem like he believed her. The atmosphere was getting seriously heavy, and Aaliyah realized this Cedric guy wasn't just gonna let her go. But right then, Caleb smacked him in the face with a towel, telling him to back off Aaliyah. He also demanded Cedric drop the spell right now and let the girl go. And to make sure Cedric got the message, the kid explained that this girl had saved his life. Then Cedric found out that his brother almost got eaten by a wolf, but Aaliyah stepped in and took the beast down. Now the kid's totally disgusted with his brother because he was trying to kill his savior. At that moment, Cedric's face was a picture of pure shock. Then he wanted to know why Caleb didn't just use his magic and head back to the duchy. Turns out, the kid put up the barrier himself, and Aaliyah was surprised he even used magic. She didn't get how he could do it, since his hand was all messed up just yesterday. But Caleb confessed he used magic because he wanted to hang out with Aaliyah a little longer. Then he apologized to the girl for having to trick her. Even though he was injured, he could still use magic, and he had to deceive her to avoid going back too soon. The girl was a little shocked, but she understood the boy's desire and wasn't angry at all. Hugging him, Aaliyah explained that there was nothing wrong with his motive, and he shouldn't apologize. This touched Caleb so much that he started crying, which was a little surprising. since in the original story, he never shed a tear. At the same time, Aaliyah herself didn't want to part with the boy she was having so much fun with, and when she admitted this, Caleb suggested she come with them to the duchy. This was unexpected for her, but it was even stranger to hear that she should marry Cedric. They decided to discuss that later, and Caleb was told to get some sleep, and he fell asleep very quickly. Aaliyah was still buzzing from what happened, but she figured she'd offer her other guests something too. So she headed to the kitchen to whip something up, and that's when Cedric suddenly appeared. And get this! He'd taken off his soaking wet shirt and was about to sit down at the table like that. The girl was totally flustered by his appearance. She couldn't figure out why he had to do that. Still, she gave him some warmed-up tea while the food was cooking. The Duke thanked her, and while he was drinking, Aaliyah realized she was staring at his ripped physique. She immediately turned away, knowing it was rude to gawk like that. But she couldn't help thinking the Duke looked way better than those buffed-up dudes in kimonos. While Aaliyah was lost in thought, Cedric stood up and apologized for barging into her place like this. Plus, he knew she'd whacked him with the frying pan to protect Caleb. The girl wanted to keep talking, but to avoid being awkward, she tossed him a blanket to cover up. She was curious about him. This guy barely got any screen time in the original story. He's got a cold stare, but Cedric seems like a decent dude at heart. Then she remembered Caleb's weird request and asked why the kid was talking about marriage. Cedric was blunt, saying it was most likely because of the curse. Caleb figures the cure report might be in the Temple of Knowledge, but you gotta be head of the family to get in. And there's a ceremony you gotta do, where you swear your allegiance. Only blood relatives can perform the ceremony, and Cedric's blood isn't a match. But if he's married, then he gets the right to perform the ceremony. So that's why Caleb asked her to marry him. The Duke just straight up admitted he's never seen his brother like this, trusting someone so much. Then he dropped a bomb on Aaliyah. Nobody wants to marry him, because of rumors the curse is contagious. But it's just rumors, spread on purpose by someone. To ease her worries, Cedric promised to head straight back to the duchy with his brother, the second he wakes up. Aaliyah remembered Caleb wanted to hang out with her a bit longer, and asked why they're making him an archduke. Cedric's been straight with her so far, and she hoped he'd give her an answer. So he confessed that, for some unknown reason, Caleb was kidnapped right after he was born. His parents searched for 4 years before finding out he was in an orphanage. That's when Aaliyah remembered the original story mentioned the assassination of the Indigenia. They were attacked on the way back from the orphanage, and everyone in the carriage was killed. Caleb was the only survivor, and it was a total tragedy for everyone. Ever since then, some vassals have hated the little Duke and been spreading rumors. Since Cedric can't inherit the title because of his blood, Caleb has to become Archduke to protect himself. His brother didn't want Caleb constantly relying on others, and he saw his curse as a secondary problem. Now, Aaliyah's starting to understand why Cedric's working so hard to keep his little brother alive. But if that happens, the kid won't be able to live the life he wants, and the girl knew there was nothing she could do to help him, except listen. But if Cedric marries her and joins the Temple of Knowledge, he won't find a way to lift the curse. That just leaves finding the fairy who put the curse on him in the first place. Cedric noticed the worry on the hut owner's face, and she was just mentally kicking herself for not thinking of this sooner. I mean, she read the novel. She knows that when Caleb became Archduke, the fairy kidnapped the main character, so Aaliyah decided to find her before the royal family. Plus, it's not even clear what she actually died from. The girl planned to figure out who this fairy is, especially since she saw her face and name at the end of the novel. Only problem is, her memory was kind of failing her, and she couldn't quite recall that episode. Anyway, Aaliyah decided to cheer Cedric up by telling him she knew another way to lift the curse. Plus, they wouldn't necessarily have to get married, and she could change the course of history. The girl tried again to picture what the fairy's face looked like, and when the memories started flooding back, Aaliyah went into a total stupor. Even Cedric had trouble getting through to her. She remembered the description of the silver hair that takes on a pinkish hue. The fairy's eyes were like 2 precious jewels. Aaliyah was floored to learn that she was the one who cursed Cedric, and while the Duke was trying to snap her out of her stunned state, her brain kept churning, and she realized she could actually lift the curse herself. Later, when Caleb woke up, they told him Aaliyah had agreed to marry Cedric. The girl did her best to fake happiness about them going to the duchy together. Cedric confirmed it was true too, though he was clearly a little nervous. Aaliyah herself had proposed to him yesterday, as a way to break his curse. The young master was visibly surprised, but you could see the joy plastered all over his face. But first, Aaliyah wanted to clear a few things up. Since she's the one who caused this mess, she better be able to fix it. All she ever wanted was to see those two live happily ever after. But there's no way she can pull that off now, because she's got zero memory of what the real Aaliyah did. All she knows is her name and age, plus she doesn't even have a basic grasp of magic. And now, the girl felt totally desperate, scared she wouldn't be able to do anything, At least Caleb didn't recognize her, probably because she always wore a black hood before. The story's changed now, but she just wants to run, terrified the kid's gonna figure out who she is. And then he'll unleash all his rage on her, cause she messed with them and didn't break the curse. The thought that she'd have to die if that happens really freaked Aaliyah out. But there's another problem. When the fairy was locked up, she died a mysterious death. Could be a chronic illness, or maybe one of her old vassals iced her. Either way, doesn't matter if Aaliyah runs or not, she's toast either way. So her best shot at survival right now is marrying Cedric and seeing how things play out. Aaliyah was hoping she'd figure out how to break the curse eventually. Then she could bail and get far, far away. She could finally live her own life, and Cedric and Caleb could live happily ever after. Aaliyah didn't want to get involved at first, obviously, but since she's a fairy now, she's got to help them out. She doesn't care anymore that this is a novel's world. These people are real to her now. Later, Cedric explained to his little brother that he's marrying Aaliyah, but it's gonna be an unusual marriage. They're entering into a marriage contract, and it'll last until the curse is broken. Then she's free to go back home. Surprisingly, Caleb didn't throw a fit, like he knew this was coming. Aaliyah and Cedric decided to lay it all out for the kid right away, so he wouldn't be bummed later. He pretended he got it, but then he said Aaliyah didn't have to come back to this dump. Because divorcing Cedric doesn't mean she has to ditch the duchy. She can live with Caleb. Plus, she'll need some kind of official status, and the kid promised to be her guardian. The news that she could keep living in the castle was a nice surprise for Aaliyah, but also kind of shocking. But it meant something had changed in Caleb himself, and for the better. That's when Cedric chimed in, saying that what he was suggesting would be complicated, because first and foremost, they gotta consider what Aaliyah actually wants. And that's when the kid declared that this lady likes being with him. She told him so herself. That's when it hit him. Aaliyah never actually talked about what she wanted. Both brothers locked eyes on her, waiting for some kind of answer, but she just froze up. Sensing the awkwardness, Cedric suggested they change scenery, get out of here. Plus, they needed to hash out the contract details anyway. Aaliyah agreed that this whole situation was the best shot at solving Cedric's problem. And Caleb, he was just stoked she'd be sticking around a little longer. Aaliyah felt kind of bad for the kid. He had to grow up way too fast. Besides, she actually enjoyed hanging out with him, because he reminded her so much of uni. Aaliyah hoped her memories would come back. She'd break the curse, and Caleb wouldn't plunge the world into chaos. But she knew she was ultimately to blame, being Aaliyah and all, even if it all went down before she was reborn. So she can't bring herself to tell Kale that their fun is a lie, and she's decided to ditch these feelings ASAP. But right now, she needs to focus on solving the problem at hand. And soon, they arrived at the castle, its gloomy vibe barely covered by the white snow. That snow didn't last long, because Cedric canceled the spell. After Aaliyah took a look around, she thought the place was just epic. The girl was stoked, especially since she knew nothing about this place. And she even wondered if she could handle the task she's been given. Later, Cedric explained that she'd have to meet the vassals, and that kind of freaked her out. But since Kale's back at the palace, the Duke needs to announce it and let everyone know about their upcoming marriage. She doesn't have to do anything else today, and she can chill in her room, which the maid will show her to. That's when the young master's advisor came up and whispered something to him. Then Cedric got ready to leave for the meeting, telling Aaliyah to let him know if she needed anything. But then Kale stopped him, announcing that he wanted to join the meeting too. This was a little unexpected for both Cedric and Aaliyah. Originally, this kid never participated in meetings until his brother fell into that coma. But now, Kale understood that he could be just a normal boy in the woods, but not here. Aaliyah saved him back then and took care of him. She even had to accept his request. That's why he wants to guarantee her safety while she's staying in the duchy. The girl was slightly shocked. She didn't know what to say to that. Cedric, on the other hand, noticed that this lady had given his brother confidence in just a few days. He agreed to take Caleb with him, and Caleb promised Aaliyah he'd be back real soon. Left on her own, she was worried about the kid being okay. She wished she could have gone with him, but she trusted nothing bad would happen with Cedric there. A minute later, a girl with dark pink hair walked in. Olivia, Aaliyah's new maid. The girl seemed good-natured and didn't raise any red flags. Aaliyah just silently celebrated getting her own personal maid. She learned from Olivia that the meeting with the vassals had already started, and she started worrying again about how Caleb would handle himself, because even though he's got a title, he's still just a kid. At the meeting, Marquis Reynold Babylon was pissed that some chick was gonna marry the family head, but Cedric told him to watch his mouth and not call him that in front of the future Archduke. He also said he loved this girl, so everyone better watch their freaking mouths. The Marquis couldn't argue with that, so he just ground his teeth in rage. Cedric was there to share news, not to get an earful, and he planned to get married ASAP. The ministers remembered when Caleb went missing. The young master used magic and froze the entire palace. So they decided not to push it, but they started plotting to get rid of this upstart, and Marquis Babylon was totally losing it. Because if Cedric gets married, his whole plan is ruined. Babylon is the only brother of the previous Archduchess Idisol, and he's like an uncle to Cedric and Kilabu. After having all the family members murdered, he still couldn't become the second in command. But when Cedric was cursed, the Marquis started cooking up a new plan and spread rumors to stop him from getting married. People were afraid the curse was contagious and slowly began to distance themselves from Cedric. So, the Marquis was planning to get rid of Caleb using Jeriel's daughter, who was his tutor. After that, Cedric would become Archduke, and to break the curse, he'd have to marry Jeriel. That would make Marcus Babylon a guy with absolute power. But the appearance of this chick changed everything. Reynold was worried that Cedric would end up in the Temple of Knowledge and might learn something about Caleb's past. Then Cedric just straight up announced that his fiancée would be taking etiquette lessons with Caleb. That pissed the Marquis off even more, because his daughter didn't graduate from the academy to tutor some commoner. Caleb shut Babylon up, demanding that they not call the lady that, and his face twisted with rage. Reynold even got scared by that. He'd never seen the kid like that before. At the same time, he was radiating intense pressure when he reminded them that the lady was the future Duchess Indigence. From the boy's reaction, it was clear to everyone that this girl meant a lot to him. Babylon knew he was screwed for now, but decided to turn this problem into an opportunity. First thing he did was figure out how to kick this chick out of the duchy. Meanwhile, Aaliyah was totally blown away. The bed was so soft, she'd never slept on anything like it, not even in her past life. And the next morning, she noticed she wasn't puffy at all, even though she'd gone to bed super late. Turns out, she'd gotten some seriously high-end skincare the night before. Now, her eyes really did look like precious gems, and she was stoked about it. Then a maid showed up and announced that breakfast was ready. Olivia wheeled a full table into the room, piled high with all kinds of snacks. Aaliyah couldn't believe she could just chow down on all this fancy food without a worry. Then, Olivia said to let her know when she was done with breakfast, because Master Cedric was waiting for her. The maid even offered to help Aaliyah with her outfit, but she insisted she could handle it. Olivia argued though, saying she was meeting her fiancé, so she needed to look absolutely flawless. Cedric was in his office, buried in paperwork, when he was told that Lady Aaliyah had arrived. Without looking up, he apologized for making her come see him so early, but she reassured him, saying she was in a great mood after such pleasant dreams in that soft bed. Cedric was glad she liked the room and asked her to wait a bit while he finished up the documents. But then he looked up and saw how transformed she was. He was now facing a real beauty, and her sweet smile only added to her charm. Cedric caught himself falling hard for her, but decided to play it cool. And in a calm voice, he asked her again to wait just a little longer. Aaliyah totally clocked that this dude froze when he saw her, and she was kinda digging it. While she was waiting, Cedric's right-hand man, Edwin Polanoa, rolled up and gave her the greetings. She remembered seeing him yesterday, and was glad to finally get a proper introduction. Edwin started to explain why she'd been suddenly summoned, but then Lord Cedric cut him off, saying he'd handle it, and Edwin booked it out of there. He was redder than a beet, which Aaliyah found kinda hilarious. Then the Duke snapped his fingers, and this clear dome popped up around them. He explained to Aaliyah it was so no one could eavesdrop on their conversation. Next, he asked if Aaliyah remembered anything, but she was drawing a blank. Then she remembered telling him she'd lost her memory and said there were still no improvements. She was out of options, but seriously, she remembers nothing about her character. They decided to keep her amnesia a secret from everyone in the castle, though. Luckily, Khalib bought her story right away. Aaliyah just didn't know what Cedric thought. Then the Duke handed her a contract, explaining they needed to be on the same page to set a wedding date as soon as possible. The contract's for 3 years, and if the curse isn't lifted by then, it gets extended. Aaliyah also gets a monthly salary. Cedric just asked her to keep track of all her expenses, and when he told her to let him know if it wasn't enough, she was floored, considering all those zeros. After figuring out that it translated to 3 billion won a month, Aaliyah practically screamed in surprise. But that just made Cedric think the amount was too low. That was another shock for Aaliyah. Back in her old life, she could have bought a decent house with that kind of money. She couldn't figure out why Cedric was being so generous. The contract was even tweaked in her favor, but then she decided it was hush money, and she wasn't wrong. On top of that, Cedric explained she'd be getting that amount as compensation for restricting her freedom. Then, he asked her to consider another clause. She couldn't leave the duchy without an escort. In other words, if she wanted to step outside the boundaries, it'd have to be with Cedric or Caleb. Also, a knight order would be formed for her protection, and the servants would be from his inner circle. They'd be the Duke's eyes and ears, and that was starting to freak her out. She realized that while she was in the duchy, Cedric would be watching her every move. For a while, they both stayed silent. the Duke giving her time to think it all over, and she was trying to snap out of her shock, realizing she'd be practically a prisoner here. Then again, she's got nothing to lose, especially since she'll be living the high life, and she agreed to the terms. The young master was expecting a slightly different reaction from her, didn't think she'd jump at it so fast. But Aaliyah explained that she understood his concerns, seeing as she can't really say anything about herself, and she's totally cool with him being a little suspicious of her. Besides, after her past life, the girl's used to being watched all the time. Next, Aaliyah finished reading the rest of the contract and said there was nothing that needed changing. Still, Cedric asked her to let him know if she suddenly wanted to add anything to it. But the girl figured it was all spelled out so perfectly, there wasn't anything she could add. She knew that once the curse was lifted, she'd get compensation, buy herself a house, and live there in glorious solitude. But then she remembered how much fun she had hanging out with Caleb, and she asked me to add one more thing to the contract. Aaliyah wanted the right to visit the duchy sometimes after the divorce, so she could see Caleb. That request struck Cedric as a little weird. And then she explained that when she's with him, her memories slowly start to come back. Plus, he looks a lot like someone who was really precious to her. After thinking about it, the young Duke agreed to the condition, especially since his brother also loves the girl. But first, he still wanted to get Caleb's opinion, just to make sure he wasn't against adding that clause. Aaliyah was so happy, like her biggest wish had come true. After that, she left Cedric's office, and once she was outside the door, it was like she snapped back to reality. She just wanted to live a quiet, solitary life, and she didn't understand why she'd done that. Olivia spotted her looking a little down. She even got worried that something had happened to Madame, because she was all hunched over and clearly anxious. Aaliyah reassured her that everything was fine. She just wasn't used to the new place yet. At the same time, she was happy again that she would be able to see Caleb sometimes later. Meanwhile, Cedric was trying to figure out why Aaliyah had so quickly agreed to the restriction of her freedom. Just then, his assistant showed up again, completely gushing over Madame Aaliyah's beauty. Edwin confessed that he had never seen such mysterious eyes before. They say that only a small fraction of fairies are born with eyes like precious gems. However, Cedric wasn't sure that Aaliyah was a purebred fairy and thought she was a half-breed. Edwin would have believed that Madame Fairy was purebred, if he'd been told so, because she's not just got beautiful eyes. She's got gorgeous long hair and a voice that just rings. But then Edwin caught the disapproving look from Lord Cedric and clammed up, realizing how much he values Aaliyah. After all, she might be the key to breaking the curse, and Cedric hates it when someone messes with what's his. The advisor's gonna have to watch his step now, because he definitely values his life. Still, Cedric knew his servant had a point. That girl stood out, even back when she was living in that shack. And if you really think about it, she actually does look like a pureblood fairy. The Duke doesn't know Aaliyah personally, but he senses she's emotional and kind-hearted. Plus, she's the complete opposite of him. Cedric still couldn't forget how she shrieked in surprise. And then she got all excited like a kid, agreeing to all the terms of the contract. Suddenly, the Duke caught himself thinking about this girl way more than he should be. That's when the advisor's voice, like the devil on my shoulder, piped up, pointing out that Cedric had just smiled. Edwin was genuinely shocked to see the boss smile. Hadn't seen him crack one in ages. And just to keep the assistant busy, he told him to deal with the rest of the paperwork. So, Cedric punished him for blabbing, and headed off to have lunch with Caleb. On the way, the young Duke was thinking about how the contract was signed. And now he had to get ready for the wedding. And then his thoughts drifted back to Aaliyah. He was curious about that floral scent she had, though he might have just imagined it, since he'd lost his sense of smell because of the curse. So, he just couldn't have smelled anything. Meeting up with Caleb, Cedric explained that Aaliyah wanted to see him sometimes, after the curse is broken and they get divorced. No way this girl actually wants to hang out with him. He figured she had a hard time saying yes before, but that wasn't enough for Caleb. He was already scheming how to keep Aaliyah in the duchy even after the divorce. For now, he's just going along with it, betting he can figure something out later. Then, Cedric asked if they could talk about their plans for after the contract's up. He also announced that Caleb's back to etiquette lessons tomorrow, and Aaliyah's joining him. The lessons themselves sucked, but Aaliyah being there cheered him up, so he promised to try his best. Cedric thought his reaction was kinda weird. Caleb looked bummed out for some reason. He figured the kid would be stoked, cause Aaliyah was coming, but it was her request that really made him happy. Cedric just wanted his brother to open up about what he was feeling. Meanwhile, Aaliyah went for a walk in the garden. She loved it, and the weather was perfect. She really wanted to take a walk around here with Caleb, especially since he'd promised her a tour of the whole duchy. At first, Aaliyah wasn't sure about this place, but now she's glad. Everyone seems so nice. She was also curious about what the vassals looked like, and hoped they wouldn't be pointing fingers at their marriage. The problem was still getting the real Aaliyah's memories back, and that needed to be sorted out ASAP. Suddenly, the girl overheard the maids chatting excitedly about something. Apparently, the maids hadn't seen Cedric and Caleb have such a nice dinner together in ages. Aaliyah thought about leaving, but then heard that the brothers still felt awkward around each other. Their relationship was good, but for some reason, there was always this uncomfortable vibe. Aaliyah found it weird to hear about such a relationship between the brothers. In the original story, they were super close, but for some reason, the girl was now seriously thinking about it. Not long before, when Aaliyah was about to have lunch, she knew Cedric and Caleb were already eating. Olivia wondered why her mistress was dining alone and not with the master. She just humbly explained that she didn't want to bother the brothers, since she heard they often ate together, so she didn't want to interrupt their bonding. But for some reason, that surprised the maid. And now, Aaliyah understood there was a problem she knew nothing about. Later, while walking through the garden, lost in thought, the girl heard Caleb's voice. They'd agreed to meet earlier, and now the boy was hurrying to her. At the same time, he realized that it was hard for her to be here alone, since she hadn't gotten used to the place yet. Aaliyah assured him that she was fine, then asked how lunch with Cedric went. The kid's answer was pure joy, like everything was going exactly as he hoped. That made the girl happy. Now they could take a nice, easy stroll with the little guy. Caleb himself was also itching to show Aaliyah everything. They stopped on a stone bridge to take in the sights, and Aaliyah was super impressed with the area. Then she spotted a flower on the bank, similar to the spark flower they'd seen in the forest. The girl scooped Caleb up onto her back and was about to dash over there for a closer look. Later, they chilled on a bench by the fountain, just relaxing for a bit. They'd had a blast all day, and Caleb admitted he was super happy when Aaliyah was with him. Then he remembered they were going to be attending etiquette lessons together, and the kid was worried Aaliyah might get disappointed in him when she saw his immature side. She knew he wanted to impress her, but he was still just a kid, and he also promised he wouldn't let her down, that he'd really try hard in class. Still, Aaliyah wasn't quite getting what he meant, and asked him to explain. According to him, people don't like you if you're a screw-up. That pissed Aaliyah off, and she told him not to listen to dumb prejudices. But Caleb was still worried that Aaliyah wouldn't like him anymore if he didn't try his best. Now she figured someone had specifically told him that, even mentioning her name. And little Caleb believed it, like it was just how things were. She had a hunch it was that teacher he met with this morning who told him all this. Seeing the worry on her face, the boy immediately thought she was mad. That's when she remembered the red marks on his hands and finally figured out how he got them. Plus, the fact that they make him eat less, so he looks good at events. Realizing that the teacher was probably the cause of all this, Aaliyah asked Caleb to listen carefully. But first, she asked him to show her his palms again, and seeing those scars again, she asked him to be honest. Does the teacher beat him with a rod? She noticed those scars the first day they met, and now she understands why he wears gloves. Caleb immediately started making excuses, saying he was punished for not being smart enough. He hid the wounds so people wouldn't see and be disappointed in him. And he made excuses for the teacher too. Aaliyah realized that Caleb completely trusted his teacher, who didn't even treat him like a human being. And the way that teacher instructs the boy, in Aaliyah's opinion, is just plain brainwashing. She remembered from the novel that Caleb's tutor was Jeriel Babylon, the daughter of Marquis Babylon, who tried to marry her off to Cedric, but that plan tanked. In the original novel, the young duke refused the wedding, and the Marquis's intentions to marry his daughter off when the curse got worse were super obvious. Then, Aaliyah asked if Caleb had talked to his brother about the etiquette lessons. Just like she thought, the kid was keeping quiet because he was scared of disappointing his brother. Plus, the tutor was insisting that Cedric shouldn't see the bruises. Apparently, Caleb would just be distracting his older brother. The tutor also said that Caleb annoys Cedric during dinner, and he only talks to him because he has to. That's why the kid wants to study even harder and put in even more effort. Caleb trusted his teacher knew what he was missing, and that scared Aaliyah, because the kid's just plain freaked out. But now it hit her. That's the whole reason the brothers have such a messed up relationship. Meanwhile, Marquis Reynolds been using his vassals to trap the little duke, and Jeriel's manipulating him, acting all caring, and Caleb buys every word she says. Thing is, if the brothers get along, it screws up their plans, because Jeriel's convinced Caleb his brother hates him. So, the kid started keeping his distance from Cedric, and Cedric probably thinks his little brother hates him and wants nothing to do with him. This girl just wished the brothers could open up to each other. She remembered the look on his face when he realized Caleb trusted her so much. And this dude, even knowing the quickest way to break the curse, is ready to give it up for his brother. In the original story, right before he died, Cedric said he would have been cool with it if he didn't care about Caleb. But because of Jeriel and Reynolds, Caleb couldn't think straight. Aaliyah wanted to fix this somehow, so she knelt down next to the kid and took his hands, and asked him why he was acting like this. She blamed herself too, for not noticing sooner that his scars weren't just normal scrapes. Then she explained that this method of teaching kids was unacceptable, and he shouldn't put up with it. He shouldn't be punished, and he shouldn't think it's his fault for not knowing something. Caleb listened to Aaliyah carefully, but he still didn't get why she was saying all this. But she kept going, saying that not everything the teacher says is true, and she begged the kid not to fill his head with all the stupid stuff that woman makes up. Just because she got picked in an interview at the Duke's place doesn't give her the right to beat up a kid. Aaliyah asked Caleb what he felt when the teacher said all this was for his own good, his future. All the kid could think was that he wasn't trying hard enough. But Aaliyah wanted to know what emotions were actually bubbling up when he heard those words from the teacher. The kid remembered staring at his scarred-up hands and confessed that it made him sad. He also wanted to know if what they were telling him was true, but there was no one he could ask. He wanted to go to Cedric, but he was afraid Cedric would hate him even more. And those thoughts just kept replaying in Caleb's head. The kid just didn't want to be hated and figured he didn't have any other options. Now he's lost, doesn't know what to do or even what to believe anymore. As Aaliyah listened to Caleb and looked at his face, her heart ached knowing the kid had been through so much. And now he was admitting he only wanted to believe her, and he was practically crying when he said it. She stroked his hair and told him to believe in himself more. If he did that, he could do anything, and he wouldn't have to be afraid of anything. Her words hit the kid like some kind of spell, and he just couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They hung out in the garden until Caleb calmed down. Then she took him back to his room. On her way back to her own room, Aaliyah felt a surge of anger toward the Marquis and his daughter. She wanted to smear them across the walls. She even pictured herself barging in on them like some thug and showing those bastards what's what. She was so lost in thought that she didn't immediately hear Cedric calling her name. He was just curious why she and Caleb were out so late and how she was finding the castle. The surprise hit Aaliyah so hard, she couldn't find the words right away. But she remembered Caleb's request to keep it quiet from his brother for now. He wanted to tell him himself, he's just scared. So all she said was they were having a blast, got carried away, and she just now put him to bed. That's when she noticed the young master was giving her a weird look, and she immediately apologized for taking up so much of his little brother's time. She was thinking, though, Cedric should probably spend more time with the kid himself. Besides, she's got to get ready for tomorrow's etiquette lesson. And first things first, gotta separate Jareel and Reynold, and honestly, try to fire that teacher. If Babylon's vassal's daughter gets canned, it'll cause an uproar and mess with their plan. But it's the quickest way to save Caleb from the brainwashing. Aaliyah was ready to throw down like never before. She was seriously pissed that someone was messing with the little guy. And before she leaves this whole duchy, she's gonna make sure Gerald's stench is completely gone from here. The next morning, Aaliyah headed to class after Olivia helped her get ready. On the way, the girl was hoping everything would go as smoothly as possible. She'd been racking her brain about this all night, but she still hadn't figured out how to get rid of Gerald. So far, Aaliyah only saw one way to fire that scumbag without blowing the whistle on Caleb's situation. And her plan was called Operation Use Cedric. Aaliyah was hoping to find some screw-ups during the first lesson, so she could complain to the master. That way, Cedric would doubt Gerald's skills and start looking for another tutor. This way, Aaliyah will be able to easily get rid of Jareel. But this is our only plan for now. And if it fails, Aaliyah couldn't think of any alternatives. She even envied those other novel heroines who solve problems on the fly. We gotta play this smart, because we can't just beat Gerald up even though I really want to. Aaliyah thought this situation was super tough, but she believed it would all work out. When she got to class, Caleb greeted her and asked if she enjoyed the breakfast. The girl nodded okay and noticed that he slept well. Still, she was worried about him and hoped he wouldn't have to put up with that bullying anymore. Then, a servant announced that Marquis Vivillon's daughter, Gerald, had arrived. Aaliyah tensed up, but was ready to face this scumbag head-on and told them to let her in. Gerald entered and greeted her students in the most appropriate manner. Her face didn't show even a hint that she'd ever hurt a kid. What Aaliyah saw was way different from what she'd imagined. That lady just started showering the future Duchess with compliments, even saying she had a super gentle voice. Then Jareel started the lesson, and Aaliyah's task was to try walking correctly. But first, the teacher asked her to walk across the room the way she normally does. The girl was even a little bummed. Jareel was actually teaching, like a real teacher should. What surprised her more was when the Marchioness complimented her walk. Aaliyah realized that at this rate, she wouldn't be able to pull off her plan. But then she figured out the teacher wasn't just being nice for no reason. She definitely had an agenda. And looking at that smiling face, Aaliyah wanted even more to smack it, but she held back. Second lesson, third lesson, same deal. Gerald was killing it, no doubts about her skills. Aaliyah was itching for her to drop the act, so she could finally kick her to the curb. But then, out of nowhere, the Marchioness got all serious on her. Turning to the lady again, she straight up said Aaliyah wasn't learning from her mistakes and was way too slow on the uptake, and added that if the lady kept it up, The young master would be seriously disappointed in her. The girl didn't get why Gerald was bringing up Cedric, but this was clearly the start of some serious brainwashing. Gerald kept hammering on about how Lady Aaliyah had to look perfect at the wedding. Then she promised she could totally pull it off. Just trust her completely. It was all for Aaliyah's own good. And that's when Aaliyah realized this snake was trying to play her. Bingo! The moment she'd been waiting for. Now she could move on to the next phase. Gerald didn't just hate the new student, she loathed her. When her dad announced she'd be tutoring some nobody, she totally lost it. But the Marquis couldn't stop it, because it was the Duke's orders. Gerald's mom kept saying it would help her become Duchess faster, but she still threw a fit. They followed the order, but didn't even ask her. She practically cried, saying she didn't go to the academy to tutor some commoner. Her mom and dad kept trying to calm her down. They promised the Indigencia family would soon be theirs, just gotta hang in there, and told her not to sweat Caleb, since he already trusts her completely, so no problems. They couldn't figure out how Eli managed to get that kid on her side so fast. They figured she couldn't do anything anyway, and they'd find a way to ditch her. I mean, you can always spot the flaws in a commoner, even if you promote them. Now, Gerald's gotta become the perfect daughter of the Marquis, so she can manipulate that girl. The Marchioness agreed, but she was a little worried, though she figured it wouldn't be too hard to pull off. But she didn't see it coming that Aaliyah knew everything and had started playing her own game. While they were chatting about Aaliyah's successes, she confessed she'd talked to the Duke about her shortcomings. She was also worried that she was just a commoner, and people would judge the difference in status. She also admitted that Cedric came up to her in the flower field afterward and said something. He didn't care about her status or abilities, and he didn't give a damn what anyone else thought. Cedric asked Aaliyah to just be herself, because he fell in love with her exactly as she is. Aaliyah just kept replaying Cedric's confession of love over and over, out loud. Seeing the look on Gerald's face, she added that status and power mean nothing compared to love. But the teacher was forcing a smile, confused why this girl wasn't falling for her tricks. She'd done everything to make this commoner feel bad, and just decide to leave. Meanwhile, Aaliyah was secretly gloating that Gerald had fallen into her own trap, and now she was curious to see how it played out. It was also a bonus that Caleb was engrossed in his book and hadn't heard a thing. With that, Aaliyah figured they could wrap up the walking lesson. All the while, she waited for the Marchioness's reaction, keeping that smug smile plastered on her face, when suddenly, Gerald announced that they would now move on to a deeper study. The Marchioness even smiled, but it was a kind of sinister smile. After that, Jeriel brought Aaliyah some high heels, explaining she needed to learn how to walk in them. To the girl, this felt like some kind of hellish trial, but she understood Jeriel was just trying to show her that she was completely useless. Still, she acted interested, believing she could at least take a few steps without breaking her neck. Even before her rebirth, Aaliyah rarely wore heels, and putting these shoes on made her knees shake. When she'd taken a few steps, Jeriel told her to walk even faster. She was probably waiting for Aaliyah to fall, but Aaliyah believed in herself. But then she felt something weird, like there was another catch to this whole thing. And sure enough, with the next step, the heel on the shoe started to come off. Naturally, Aaliyah lost her balance and fell, and Jeriel pretended to be super concerned about her. Now the girl understood exactly what the Marchioness was planning. She probably broke the heel on purpose, but that could have led to a broken leg. Aaliyah wanted to give her a piece of her mind, because her patience was wearing thin, but the Marchioness immediately crouched down next to her and started wailing, acting like she couldn't believe the shoes were broken. The maid prepped them, and Gerald couldn't believe she'd let something like that slip. Then she promised to punish that servant, since she's the one responsible. Aaliyah was about to argue when Caleb ran up to her, saw what happened, and started freaking out about her. Then, he asked to end the lesson for today, and go to her room to treat the wound. Surprisingly, even Gerald agreed to call it quits for the day. With a deeply sorrowful look on her face, she told Lady Aaliyah to get some rest, but she knew those emotions were totally fake. Still, she believed she could handle whatever that bitch had planned for her and get rid of her. She could have dealt with her right then and there, but decided to play it smarter. Plus her leg was kinda numb. Later, Aaliyah was brought a doctor. She actually did cut her leg a bit, but all her bones were fine, and she only got away with a small scratch. The doctor gave her ointment to help her skin heal faster, and told her to make sure the cut didn't get infected. Caleb was still worried about Aaliyah being okay, and she assured him there was nothing to worry about. She noticed Caleb seemed kinda embarrassed, like he wanted to say something but was afraid to, so she asked him to sit down next to her on the bed. Then he apologized to her because he had another lesson and had to leave. The kid promised he'd be back right after class, and told her to get some rest. Once he was out the door, Caleb stood there for a second, like he was cooking up a plan. What happened to Aaliyah was eating him up inside. He loved her and was super worried. He hoped she'd be feeling better by the next lesson, because he didn't want to be stuck alone with the teacher again. Meanwhile, Olivia came to see Aaliyah and admitted she was really worried when she heard she'd taken a spill. But the maid was even more shocked when she found out Caleb had tried to carry Aaliyah. Olivia told Aaliyah to take the day off and to call her if she needed anything at all. The girl said she was fine, but it made her happy to know everyone cared about her. After telling the maid she'd get some rest, Aaliyah secretly celebrated that she'd done so well today. Still, it pissed her off that that bitch of a Marchioness had made Caleb worry. Turns out the teacher was a little off her rocker, so Aaliyah decided to tell Cedric what happened. Gerald Babylon came from a seriously wealthy family, and she always got her way. She got everything she ever wanted, but still kept craving more. And looking at how she acts, you can tell all the Marquis's family members are the same. Then, Aaliyah had an idea, and asked Olivia to invite the etiquette teacher to see her. Gerald wasted no time, and as soon as she walked in, she started fussing over the young lady's injury. She was trying to act genuinely concerned, and she wasn't a bad actress either. But that's not what Aaliyah wanted to talk about, so she asked the maid to leave them alone. Gerald realized something was up, but she didn't let it show. And once they were alone, still smiling, she asked why she'd been called in. Right off the bat, I told her I didn't punish that maid like Lady Aaliyah wanted. I even called you an angel for forgiving the maid's mistake. But we both know that maid was innocent. She didn't mess up those shoes. That's when Aaliyah straightened up, and looking pretty serious, told Gerald to cut the act. There's no need to smile and act all friendly like that. Since it was just them in the room, the Marchioness agreed and finally relaxed her face. Then she said she didn't know how Aaliyah ended up in the duchy, but pointed out the Babylon family has a lot of pull here, and Aaliyah shouldn't think she's someone important, because she's considered a nobody here. After all, people like her lose their minds over a crumb of power. But Aaliyah wanted to know something else. Why Gerald was acting like she didn't care about little Caleb at all. But she felt no guilt, because she was convinced she was doing it for the Archduke's future. And now she's pissed that Lady Aaliyah showed up, cause everything was running smooth before she came along and wrecked the whole damn thing. Gerald didn't buy that Aaliyah was just supporting Caleb, not after knowing him since he was a baby. And she can't figure out why Aaliyah thinks she knows this kid better than anyone. Caleb trusts Gerald more than anyone, and she demanded the lady accept that fact. Aaliyah wasn't arguing that Caleb hadn't spent much time with her, relatively. Besides, his backstory wasn't really fleshed out in the novel, but she's learning about the boy's life right now, and she's kicking herself for the careless thoughts she had at first. There was so much garbage surrounding this little guy, and in that situation, he became an archduke on his own. Aaliyah knew that she'd have to leave the duchy eventually, but for now, she's sticking by him, and in that time, she was gonna teach these bastards a lesson they wouldn't forget. Now, standing face to face with the Marchioness, the girl decided to make her move. With a sweet smirk, she announced that Gerald looked absolutely hideous. She wanted to make that scumbag feel what her victims felt. At that moment, Gerald snapped, letting her emotions fly as she snarled at Aaliyah, calling her a low-born wench. Aaliyah just gave her this surprised look and asked if that was an etiquette lesson. The Marchioness reacted exactly how Aaliyah wanted. It's hard to ignore some commoner insulting you. The lady continued schooling the teacher, saying aristocrats should always watch their words and actions. That made Gerald grit her teeth, practically grinding them to dust. And then, with a scream, she swung at the girl who dared to lecture her. But she couldn't bring herself to hit, because Aaliyah grabbed her hand. Of course, she remembers all the moves from her past life, and now she's wowing the Marchioness with her power. Aaliyah reminded Gerald what she said about their plans falling apart ever since she showed up, and promised she'd keep messing with them, because Caleb doesn't deserve this kind of treatment. Just then, Cedric's voice echoed as he walked in, and both girls spun around at the same time. The Duke was with Caleb and his assistant Edwin. Looks like the kid ran and got the adults. Gerald immediately put on an innocent victim face, hoping the master would take her side, and claimed that Lady Aaliyah suddenly grabbed her, which of course shocked Aaliyah. But then Caleb spoke to the Marchioness Babylon's daughter, and in a commanding tone, he declared that she doesn't work here anymore, then demanded she get out immediately. Aaliyah was even more stunned than before, and Jareel was totally lost, not understanding why things had taken this turn. So she started begging the young master to explain why she was being fired, swearing she hadn't done anything wrong. The Marchioness hadn't expected this from the kid, who was always on her side. And now, standing there with a crazy look on her face, she was trying to figure out where it all went south. Just then, Caleb took off his gloves and showed his scars, saying the teacher should understand the basis of his decision. And since he didn't want to hear another word from her, he demanded again that she leave the duchy immediately. Gerald decided Aaliyah had somehow brainwashed the boy, and now her years of work were down the drain. Then she started making excuses to Cedric, saying it was just a minor punishment for the boy not grasping the lessons. She started begging for clarification, but Aaliyah stated that nothing gives a teacher the right to resort to violence. The Marchioness started arguing again, saying some commoner wouldn't know anything about raising nobles. Aaliyah was so fed up with the Marchioness's lame excuses that she decided to punch her lights out. But Cedric pulled her close, letting her know that she shouldn't waste her time on trash like that. Gerald saw a glimmer of hope in that, thinking the master would finally stand up for her, but he wasn't going to. He just gave her a dark warning that she wouldn't get away with hurting the people close to him. Now, the Marchioness needed to scram, and her dad was going to give her a talking to later at home, but she wasn't about to give up, and demanded proof that she was the one who did it. Because the young master's cuts and her broken heels apparently weren't direct evidence, Gerald was sure they wouldn't be able to prove she was guilty with that. Just then, her voice echoed in the room, like someone had hit play on a recording. This recording clearly showed the teacher belittling the kid, constantly saying he wasn't good enough, and that because of it, Lord Cedric wouldn't be proud of him. The recording was coming from a magic orb that Edwin, the assistant, was holding. You could even see the image of Gerald hitting the boy's palms as punishment. Edwin specifically brought this orb, which Caleb had prepared in advance. Now everyone could clearly hear and see how the etiquette lessons really went down. Caleb himself was satisfied that he'd finally opened his eyes, and decided to put the messed up teacher in her place. After that conversation with Aaliyah in the garden, he couldn't immediately believe it, but he really liked her. But Gerald's face kept popping into his head, and he believed she wouldn't hit him if he studied hard. But when Aaliyah got hurt, the boy realized something was wrong, and decided to tell his brother everything. Caleb got to Cedric, but he still couldn't get a word out. It was like Gerald was still whispering in his ear, telling him his brother would be disappointed, and the kid was scared that Cedric would actually hate him even more. But his brother noticed he was just standing there in a daze, shaking like a leaf. So he went over and wrapped a blanket around him. Cedric started asking him what was wrong, but Caleb was too afraid to even make a sound. His terrified eyes showed that something awful had happened. Cedric told his little bro to sit down on the couch, and he asked Edwin to bring like 10 more blankets. And the kid felt as warm as he did back at Aaliyah's house, and he realized that his brother actually cared about him. That gave him the courage to tell everything. Now that they were all standing in the room, Cedric told them to stop watching, since he already got the picture. Aaliyah was sweating bullets, wondering if Caleb was okay after everything he'd been through. But then she saw him smile, and she knew he'd pull through. Thing is, this ain't over yet. Gerald wasn't about to let it slide. She had to remind everyone she's from the Babylon family, and you just don't mess with them like that. Knowing this bitch was going all the way, Aaliyah's knuckles were itching to rearrange her face again. But Cedric's look stopped her, warning her not to lose it. So she told Gerald she should be grateful she's even standing, because her hand was practically begging to claw her eyes out. But then Caleb grabbed her hand and told her it was all good now. That's when Cedric chimed in, saying the Babylon family reputation definitely speaks for itself, which is why that family needs to set an example for everyone else. And within a month, this whole incident's gonna be the talk of the duchy, if not the entire capital. Then they'll decide whether or not to kick Gerald out of the family. After that, Cedric asked Edwin to take Aaliyah outside so she could get some fresh air. Meanwhile, Gerald was looking as dark as a thundercloud, realizing her family's reputation was about to be trashed. She thought she'd done everything perfectly, and she blamed Aaliyah for coming in and screwing it all up. Later, Aaliyah could finally breathe a sigh of relief that it was over. She couldn't forget the Marchioness's glare, like it was all her fault, but she was glad she handled it well. And now, as they were leaving the room with Cedric and Caleb, her fiancé thanked her for everything, because if it weren't for her, Caleb would still be suffering the Marchioness's abuse. But now they'd sorted everything out. The girl modestly explained that she hadn't done anything, which was basically true. The brothers mainly put the squeeze on the jerk. Cedric, though, was totally convinced Aaliyah was the one who deserved all the credit. Because if it wasn't for her, he'd still be clueless, and his brother would still be getting bullied. Now, the Duke just didn't know how to even begin to thank this girl. Meanwhile, she was just stoked that the brothers had finally talked things out, and believed everything would be okay now. Suddenly, Cedric apologized to Aaliyah for being rude, but she had no clue what he was talking about. Then it hit her. The time he pulled her close when she was about to rearrange the Marchioness's teeth. Cedric did that so the vassals, those guys the Marquise had bribed, wouldn't dare try to blame Aaliyah for anything. The Duke also promised that any physical contact he had with her would only happen if she gave him the okay. But Aaliyah didn't mind. He didn't mean anything by it. And then she noticed Caleb, who, at that moment, looked happier than anyone else, and she was happy for him. The girl was stoked the kid bought her story. Now no bad guy could stop him from becoming Archduke. She just wanted that kid to keep smiling like that forever. The only thing bugging her was her missing memories. If she had those, everything'd be perfect. Then Cedric got ready to head back to his office and told Lady Aaliyah to get some rest. For a split second, their eyes locked, and it felt like that moment lasted forever. Cedric snapped out of it first and apologized again for being a jerk. And then, out of nowhere, he grabbed a lock of her hair that was hanging over her shoulder. Aaliyah was confused at first. Maybe something was stuck in her hair? But the Duke brought her hair to his face and took a sniff. That was totally unexpected. She was speechless, didn't know what to say to that. Cedric explained he just wanted to check something and asked Aaliyah if she used perfume. Aaliyah admitted she'd never bought anything like that, still not getting what her fiancé was getting at. Their conversation was cut short when Caleb strolled up again, grabbed a lock of Aaliyah's hair, and took a sniff too. Right then, he reminded her of Yoonhee. When she visited him in the hospital, she'd used deodorant, and it'd get in her hair. At first, she didn't get why her brother was sniffing her hair. But then a nurse explained it all. And now, Aaliyah didn't mind Duke sniffing her hair, just as long as everything was peaceful. Later, Gerald was heading home, and she couldn't believe this had actually happened to her. The whole way, she was cursing the girl who'd ruined all her plans in just a few days. Gerald also couldn't believe Cedric had fallen for a commoner, like she was some kind of witch. And now, because of her, the Marquis might get kicked out of the family altogether. After Jareel's return, a council of vassals was formed to discuss the exile of Marquis Babylon. Naturally, the families that the Marquis had bribed were against kicking him out, but those he'd suppressed jumped at the chance, throwing out every argument they could, calling him a traitor. The vassals were pointing fingers, yelling at each other. It was a total circus. At that meeting, Cedric was just glad he'd listened to Aaliyah and left Caleb at home this time. He knew there was no way to get rid of the Babylon family's influence overnight, but he could gradually chip away at it to make sure something like this never happens again. Later, Marquis Reynold, sprawled out in his favorite armchair, was relieved he'd avoided exile. His wife was being as supportive as she could, happy that this whole mess was over. They should probably lay low for a while, but the Marquis wasn't about to let it go. He was planning an appeal. They're blood relatives of the former Archduchess, and if they're exiled, we'll have to take care of them. That's why Reynold was sure Cedric would at least consider his appeal. But he totally lost it when after a while, he saw Cedric just send the letter right back. The seal wasn't even broken, meaning the Duke didn't even bother to read it. This pissed the Marquis off like crazy, because he's the head of the family on their mom's side. Then he found out another message had arrived from the duchy. Cedric figured the Marquis was going to beg for a shorter sentence, but told him to use the time more wisely. He also told him to be thankful he didn't increase the sentence, and now the Marquis is banned from leaving the estate all week. After that, Reynold went completely nuts, flipping everything he could get his hands on. Finally catching his breath, he started cursing out Cedric for daring to go against a real aristocrat. The Marquis hated the Duke and his bride-to-be, swearing he'd make their lives a living hell. The atmosphere in the dukedom completely shifted a week after Gerald got canned. Aaliyah was loving life, taking strolls through the garden all the time, and Caleb found some new teachers that he actually liked right off the bat. The young master used to be so closed off, so it was great seeing him open up like this. Even Olivia the maid was happy seeing the kids so relaxed. His face wasn't sad anymore, and he was chatting with his new teachers like they were old friends. Aaliyah noticed how much Caleb had changed, and those changes made her super happy, because when they first met, he was cold and quiet, never saying a word about what was hurting him. In that way, the girl thought the brothers were kinda similar, but then it hit her. She barely knew Cedric at all, and most of what she did know came from Caleb. The novel didn't really describe him properly, and he hardly ever talks about himself. And Aaliyah felt like it was weird to know nothing about each other, even if it was just a contract marriage. Later, she met with Cedric to discuss some wedding stuff, but there were still a ton of details left. Now, Aaliyah had to deal with buying clothes, so much that it was exhausting for her. She decided to mix things up and remembered they served the newlyweds' favorite dishes at the reception. So, she declared that she could totally handle making those dishes herself. But to do that, she needed to know what Cedric liked so she could cook everything he wanted. The Duke admitted he wasn't picky and would eat whatever Aaliyah enjoyed, though he didn't seem too thrilled, adding that it was too late for him to be thinking about favorite foods. Right now, all 5 of his senses are slowly getting paralyzed because of the curse. The girl was obviously floored by that revelation, and Cedric, realizing he didn't quite say it right, explained that his senses were dulling, like he was falling asleep. He can't taste or smell anything anymore, so eating isn't exactly his favorite thing to do. That's why Aaliyah can make a list of dishes she likes, since everyone knows about the Duke's curse anyway. Aaliyah remembered that was right. This curse, where a person isn't dead yet, but they're not really alive either, and nothing can wake them up. Cedric's only lost his sense of taste for now, but the girl still didn't feel relieved. The Duke noticed a weird look on Aaliyah's face and got worried. But then she remembered him asking if she wore perfume and wondered what that meant. It was a mystery to Cedric too. He'd been sniffing all sorts of things for ages and felt nothing. But he can clearly smell Aaliyah, which totally throws her off. It's weird to him, because he can't even smell strong tea. Yet he can smell Aaliyah pretty damn clearly. She figures it's because she cast the curse, and that could be a problem. Aaliyah's freaked out the Duke might figure it out. And then BAM. A thunderclap and lightning amp things up. She almost crapped her pants from the fright. Neither of them knew why the storm started so suddenly. But Cedric was starting to get an idea. Just then, Caleb's voice came from across the room, and Aaliyah jumped again, totally startled. The kid was standing in the doorway, like nothing was happening. Then, he happily announced it was raining, and asked Aaliyah to make him potato pancakes, like back in the cabin. Cedric was totally lost, and Aaliyah just remembered saying that potato pancakes are usually made when it rains. Just a few minutes earlier, the sun was blazing, and Caleb was chilling in a separate study. He was doing his homework and actually finished it way faster than he thought he would. He was bored out of his skull, not knowing what to do. Plus, Aaliyah's been super busy with the wedding prep lately. She even bails right after dinner, even though she's really just trying not to get in the brothers' way. And suddenly, the kid was craving the food Aaliyah used to make when it was just the two of them in that cabin in the woods. Back then, Caleb lived off potato soup, and he was a huge fan of those potato pancakes too. But since they only make them when it rains, he's out of luck right now, because it's sunny as hell outside. Suddenly, Caleb got this nagging doubt, because Aaliyah said she doesn't remember anything about her past. Except she does remember making potato pancakes for someone, even though she might remember something while cooking. And if her memory fully returns, she'll go back to her place. That made Caleb sad. He wanted to spend more time with her while she was here. And literally just a few minutes later, a storm kicked up, and Caleb showed up at her door, asking her to make potato pancakes. The girl was actually kinda glad that it changed the subject between her and Cedric. She was happy about the kid's visit, even though she didn't get how he showed up so perfectly timed. And she promised she'd gladly show off her cooking skills again. Caleb also noticed that his brother hadn't had much of an appetite lately, and asked him to eat potato pancakes with them. Aaliyah realized that Caleb didn't know about Cedric's dulled senses yet, but she decided not to rush things herself. And the kid swore that as soon as his brother saw the potato pancakes, he'd suddenly have an appetite. Damn, now I want some potato pancakes. Eli headed to the kitchen to whip up the dish they ordered, while the Duke brothers waited at the table. The head chef had never made anything like it before, but he figured it involved a ton of oil. Eli insisted that latkes turn out way better deep fried, even though the chef had never even heard of deep fried. So, she explained that when you fry something in a lot of oil, you get this super crispy crust. She was just glad the chef wasn't bummed that she'd pushed him aside at the stove. Before long, the dish was ready, and Eli dramatically plopped it down on the table. The latkes were a slightly different shape this time, but Caleb was still drooling, dying to try them. Eli suggested they eat them with sauce this time, and wished the brothers bon appetit. The second Caleb ate the first bite, he was totally blown away by the flavor. He thought they tasted even better than the last time he had them. He kept pushing Cedric to try it while it was still there. Otherwise, Caleb would scarf down every last crumb. The Duke stared at the potato pancake like it was some alien thing, not seeing the point since he couldn't taste anything anyway. But Aaliyah knew it must be tough for him to force himself. Cedric noticed the worried look on her face and told her not to sweat it, especially since he was used to reactions like this by now. Still, Aaliyah felt awkward, knowing it was all because of her, and it made her want to get his memories back even faster. Then, Cedric popped a piece of the pancake in his mouth, and suddenly, his face totally changed. Weird noises were coming from his throat, which really freaked out Aaliyah and Caleb. The girl was especially scared that her fiancé had been poisoned, or at least was choking. They started fussing over Cedric, totally clueless about what was going on. The cook blurted out at the worst time that the food was poisoned, but Caleb chewed him out since he was fine. Poor Aaliyah was a mess. Her face just screamed pure, unadulterated terror. She wanted to call a doctor, but Cedric stopped everyone right there and announced that nothing bad happened. They just misunderstood everything. Then, his face lit up like he'd won the lottery, admitting he hadn't tasted food in ages. But a totally shocked Aaliyah still couldn't figure it out. Turns out he could taste now. Caleb jumped in, realizing his brother couldn't taste food, which meant the curse was getting worse. Cedric apologized to his brother for not telling him sooner, but Caleb told him not to apologize, just to never hide anything like that from him again. Aaliyah was happy those two were having a decent talk, since they never showed each other any emotion before, even though she was totally incapable of focusing on anything right now. And Caleb was curious why his brother could suddenly taste things. Cedric had no idea how to explain it, but Aaliyah suspected it was because she made it, since she cast the curse. She hoped Cedric wouldn't figure out she was the fairy, but either way, she held the key to breaking the curse now. Suddenly, Cedric turned his attention to Aaliyah, and lost in her own head, she got scared to death again. Turns out, the Duke just wanted seconds, and her soul managed to crawl back out of her shoes. Later that night, before bed, Aaliyah took a bath and got lost in thought. She felt super drained because she'd been so stressed out lately. Even Olivia, the maid, noticed the missus was totally bummed out, but she was super grateful to Aaliyah, even though Aaliyah had no clue why. According to Olivia, ever since Aaliyah arrived at the duchy, the atmosphere around the castle's totally changed. Aaliyah herself remembered thinking the place was a dump when she first got here, all quiet and gloomy. But after Aaliyah arrived, a lot of people felt warmth in the castle for the first time. Olivia never thought she'd see Cedric and Caleb just chatting happily like they were today. The maid noticed the kid had changed a lot, and his older brother, along with him. Cedric's face had really softened up, and today, Olivia, like the other maids, saw him smile for the first time. Olivia figured love was the reason he was acting this way, and was happy the master had experienced it. Aaliyah, on the other hand, knew it was just a contract marriage, and didn't think she deserved the credit for any of it. It was super hard for her to even smile, knowing she was the reason Cedric was messed up. The maid dipped out, and she was back to chewing over everything that went down. Now and then she's gotta cook Cedric his favorite grub, but that doesn't scare her. Meanwhile, Cedric was chilling in his room, gazing up at the night sky. He remembered them walking back from the kitchen, and how the thunderstorm just stopped out of nowhere. Cedric kinda suspected already that the little rascal was somehow behind that storm, and now he was getting even more sure of it. Their family does have that kind of magic, the kind that can control the weather. No doubt about it, Caleb was the one who changed the weather this time. But that magic drains you dry. Tons of people have tried to use it, and just crashed and burned. Nobody's cracked this thing for over a century, and freaking Cedric brings it back at 18. He tried teaching Caleb, but the dude just couldn't get it, even though Big Bro believed he could totally unleash this magic. But the kid doubted himself, figured he didn't have the juice like his brother, so he kept screwing up. Caleb wanted to ditch the whole thing, convinced he was just gonna fail like half the family. And eventually, Cedric stopped pushing his brother to learn the magic. Now, he's wondering how the heck Caleb summoned a thunderstorm that lasted for hours. Then it hit him. The kid could use magic even with a busted arm. And now he's killing it with weather magic after constantly failing before? Cedric's finding this super weird. But one thing's for sure, the Duke noticed. All these changes started happening after he met Aaliyah. He was digging for dirt on her, but he couldn't find a single thing about her or her family. The fact that Cedric could only sense her scent? Totally wild. This girl is clearly a mystery wrapped in an enigma. Right then, the Duke just had to know who this girl really was. The next morning, Aaliyah peeked out the window and saw that the weather was practically begging her to go for a walk. Plus, she still had to pick a spot in the garden for lunch, since the three of them were eating outside this time. It hit her then. Thinking about food just brought her a sense of peace. Lately, everything's been a total mess. But now the wedding date's set, and things are going pretty smoothly. Still, something was bugging her, and it was Daphne Marinest, the heroine of the novel. Aaliyah also figured that if she broke Cedric's curse, Caleb wouldn't fall into darkness, and he wouldn't become enemies with the Marinest royal family. But then, what future would Daphne have? Meanwhile, back at the Imperial Palace, this blue-haired girl named Daphne was strolling through the gardens. That's when the little prince spotted her and immediately started complimenting her looks. This prince's name is Renoa de Paratio Jatipsi Ipercent, and he was pretty tight with the little duchess, Daphne Marinest. They hung out in the garden all the time, and the prince was always showering her with compliments. He also liked to sniff her hair, which apparently is a totally normal thing to do in this empire. So, this time, they were about to start shooting the breeze, when suddenly the prince got called away. Daphne promised to wait for him, secretly stoked that she was actually happy now, compared to before she went back. Truth is, she was getting kinda tired of hanging with a 6-year-old prince, cause she felt way older. She was 6 again now, yeah? But only cause she went back in time after dying at 16. So, she's reliving her 6-year-old self again. This is a world where magic's like breathing, you know? Just taken for granted. But before she went back, Daphne couldn't even handle basic mana. That's why everyone was shady about her bloodline, since magic ran in the family. Her dad, Duke Calvados Marinest, shut down the gossip, of course. But he didn't teach Daphne any magic, because he had zero expectations for her, and Calvados showing up just to squash rumors only made her feel worse. After a while, there was this banquet celebrating Prince Renoir's birthday. Everyone at the party seemed super happy, having a blast. But then the prince stepped out on the terrace for a second, and a cloaked fairy popped up in front of him. That's when Renoir dropped his guard, and the fairy slapped a curse on him. Daphne, the one everyone said couldn't protect her family, just happened to be nearby. So, naturally, they pinned the blame on her. and she instantly became public enemy number 1, sentenced to death. Daphne was slated to be executed in prison the second she came of age. The Marchioness Jeriel herself paid her a visit, and didn't even pretend to feel bad for the girl. The Marchioness whined about wasting so much time on her, only for it to be all for nothing. Jeriel ripped into Daphne for not using her magic and sacrificing herself. After that, the girl believed it was her fault, and that she was doomed to be unloved by her father. Sometime later, Calvados showed up himself, and Daphne hoped he could bust her out. Turns out the girl was right. Her father couldn't imagine his daughter getting executed, so he helped her escape from the slammer, and she bolted through the forest in the dead of night. Gotta run while she had the chance. Dad told her to get as far away as possible, said there wouldn't be any nights on the road, but he had to stay. Daphne still couldn't figure out why he'd suddenly decided to help her out like this. Truth was, Calvados just wanted his daughter to live a happy life, doing whatever she wanted. So the girl ran. She was overflowing with joy that her father hadn't given up on her. But at the same time, her face was soaked with bitter tears at the thought of leaving her family behind. She ran for a long time. The moon was the only light guiding her, and the forest was dead silent, like there wasn't a single animal around. For a second she stopped. The urge to go back to her father was overwhelming, but she knew they'd execute her anyway, and that would kill him, so she kept running. Daphne realized the reason Dad had taken care of the rumors was so she could live free. He wanted his daughter to run away, somewhere far, far away. Now, sitting at the table, Daphne remembered trying to escape, but then a deep chasm blocked her path, and she barely stopped herself from falling in. And behind her, she heard the voices of the knights, sent after her in pursuit. The girl glanced back awkwardly, slipped, and fell into the abyss, staring death in the face. Back then, she thought it was all over, and now she couldn't believe she'd been given a second chance. After coming back, Daphne wanted to live a normal life, and started thinking about how to keep the fairy from the banquet, all while knowing she couldn't actually stop her. For some messed up reason, this time, the fairy showed up 10 years early, and Daphne used the magic of the mirror shield, which she'd never even been taught, just hoping for dumb luck. This is magic that conjures a shield made of mirrors, and it can reflect any magic or curses. Plus, it's the only thing that can block fey magic. The current imperial family got where they are because of a rebellion. 200 years ago, when the emperor was a fey, the current Iprisants started a revolt. They had powerful mirror shield magic, and that's what helped them succeed. The Marinist family comes from a side branch of the Iprisants, which is why Daphne could use the magic. Before coming back, she teleported to the Knowledge Temple, where she unconsciously mastered the mirror shield magic. And while she was thinking about all this, the prince came back to her, explaining that they'd have to part ways for today. Daphne knew that Renoir would also have to learn this magic. Meanwhile, the imperial family was trying to keep their distance from her. They figured this girl could screw up Renoir becoming the crown prince. And since she's got mirror magic too, they might think she's coming for the throne. Daphne kept reading the papers to see what kind of fallout she was causing. Then one day, she saw a story about the Indigentia family and some mess with the Marquis Babylon's daughter. All eyes are on the Duke's family right now anyway. What with Cedric's wedding coming up? Daphne noticed the bride-to-be had this kind of awkward look on her face, but she also clocked her silvery hair with pink highlights and those jewel-like eyes. Hair like that is super rare, usually only fairies have it. That's when it hit Daphne. While she was blocking one fairy spell, Cedric somehow got hit with another, but there wasn't a damn thing she could do to help the Duke. Suddenly, Daphne spotted a figure in a dark cloak with a huge hood outside the carriage window. This person was reaching out toward the little girl, who was instantly bathed in light, and she knew something terrible was happening. Meanwhile, Caleb was stoked that they were finally eating together as a family. The kid was also happy his brother could finally taste food again. Cedric seemed more at peace because of it, and Aaliyah was glad she could help him with his curse, even a little. She remembered Olivia saying she noticed he'd changed, and was actually smiling now. And just when their meal was going perfectly, Edwin showed up out of nowhere. Him interrupting dinner meant something big was up. He walked up to the Duke and reported that someone was demanding his attention. Cedric's face went stone cold, and that made Aaliyah uneasy. But then she got hit with a wave of dread herself when Edwin announced Princess Marinist had been kidnapped. And right now, they have no clue who snatched her. The news about the kidnapping clearly rattled the Duke. Aaliyah, on the other hand, completely freaked out, even yelling at the table. The news hit her that hard. Even Edwin got a little worried. But now, it was about the future Duchess's state of mind. He thought Aaliyah knew about Daphne, and Daphne, not wanting to blow her cover, said any kidnapping was upsetting. The truth was, she was worried because this whole thing felt way too much like the original story. After Daphne came back and got rid of the curse, a fairy suddenly showed up and tried to kidnap her in a fit of rage. But the plan went south, and the fairy ended up locked in the imperial family's prison. It was playing out just like the original story. Except Aaliyah didn't kidnap Daphne this time. So if this plot is following the original so closely, does that mean our girl isn't Aaliyah? Though, I guess it's possible for two people to share the same name and similar looks. She figured maybe she had a twin sister out there, someone they split up a long time ago. And if things keep going like the original story, then the only way to break Cedric's curse is gonna be lost. The girl glanced at her fiancé, a look of pure fear on her face. He started asking what was wrong, but she brushed it off, saying she was just thinking about something else. Then she asked him exactly where Lady Marinist got snatched, and found out it happened on the way back to the duchy, when she was coming back from the Imperial Palace. And that's pretty much all the info they have on the case so far. Elijah noticed Caleb was deep in thought, and his face showed he wasn't too happy about it. The kid understood the situation, but didn't see why his brother needed to get involved. That opinion struck her as pretty harsh and selfish, though she got the kid's reaction. He'd heard a name he didn't want to hear. So Duke Marinist officially reached out to all the big families, asking for their help. Everyone except Indigentia, since their family magic isn't suited for searching and investigating. Family magic can only be used by members of the family, period. Some can turn into dogs. Others worked as detectives using psychometry. Gravity magic doesn't mix well with that, which is why those families aren't considered powerful. Then there's the Meshalata family, who wield material magic. Only 3 families, the Melishats, the Marinists, and the Indigenias, are allowed inside the Temple of Knowledge. It's where all the secrets are kept, and if you want, you can find out the deepest secrets of any family. That's why these 3 families try to keep each other in check, but only the Meshalats sent in a request. Suddenly, Aaliyah noticed that Cedric's face had turned really angry, and she got worried. He thought they needed to verify the intel that the 2 families had started working together. Cedric got cursed because Princess Daphne was protecting the prince. Even so, he always kept a good relationship with the Marinist family. It was an accident when he got hurt protecting the prince, so Cedric never even asked for damages. Now, the Duke suspected they might be hiding something similar, just like they were. Then, he ordered Edwin to send people to the capital to get to the bottom of this. And he warned us everything had to be done quietly. Cedric and his brother were brainstorming their next move when Aaliyah stopped them. She declared that they needed to make the first move. Intel could leak, so they had to take control of the situation and volunteer to help. Cedric still had his doubts, and Aaliyah started figuring out how to win him over. If the person who kidnapped Daphne is actually a fairy, they might lose their chance to save Cedric, because nobody else will be able to lift the curse on him. So Aaliyah asked her future husband to go to the capital with her, because she wanted to check things out herself. Before long, Aaliyah, Cedric, and Caleb were strolling down a street in the capital. The girl was super determined and ready to handle whatever came their way, no matter what. A few hours earlier, she told Olivia that only 3 people were heading to the capital. They were going to be super discreet, so they were traveling with the bare minimum of personnel. But the maid was worried it could be too dangerous, and begged her to rethink the plan. Aaliyah stayed calm, though, because she had Cedric, who was strong now, and Caleb, who would be strong in the future. That's when Olivia remembered other maids gossiping about how she'd become so accommodating to a commoner. The maids thought Olivia had lost all her pride and was just groveling to this lady. And just then, Aaliyah showed up near them, and they freaked out, worried she might have overheard. The girl just offered to help them carry the groceries, since they looked really heavy. But they started protesting, worried the lady would hurt her delicate hands. Still, Aaliyah decided to show them she wasn't as weak as she looked, and grabbed one of the crates, slinging him over her shoulder, face like a brick wall. Aaliyah just wanted to know where to take him. Then she added that her dainty little arms could only handle this one crate. The maids would have to grab the rest themselves. And not wanting to catch the Duke's wrath later, the maids had no choice but to obey. Aaliyah decided, screw it, and gave them her crate too, while hurrying them along, telling them to move it. Olivia spotted the whole thing from around the corner, and now, remembering it, she smiled without even realizing it. She still worried about Lady Aaliyah's safety above all else, but Aaliyah told her not to sweat it. And now, here they were, the 3 of them strolling down the capital's main street. Passing various people, they approached a couple, hoping to cleverly squeeze some info out of them. Aaliyah said she was here with her family for some fun, but they'd noticed the atmosphere felt a little tense. So, these people told them about the nasty accident that had just happened. After finding out a few things, Aaliyah also noticed these 2 Duke brothers were probably together outside the palace for the first time ever. It wouldn't hurt to look around a bit, but first things first. Gotta find Daphne, especially since Aaliyah needs to figure out if she's the mastermind behind all this. Plus, gotta figure out what details are different from the original story. In the original, the fairy cursed Renoir when he was 16 years old. But after Daphne came back, he was cursed when he was only 6. No clue what made the fairy cast the curse 10 years earlier. And that wasn't in the original story. Aaliyah kept racking her brain, trying to figure out what to do to sort out this mistake. Just then, Cedric noticed more and more knights showing up and suggested they head towards the residential streets. For Aaliyah, this was a perfect opportunity to dig up some intel, but after a while, they still hadn't figured anything out, and the girl was getting desperate. They were a little tired, so they decided to take a short break before going any further. Aaliyah noticed that it was really peaceful there, and everyone seemed super chill. She spotted two boys who looked like they were brothers right off the bat, but she was mostly worried about lifting Cedric's curse ASAP, so he and his brother could live just as peacefully. The Duke noticed that his bride was lost in thought again. He remembered how she screamed hysterically when she found out about Daphne's kidnapping, and then she started begging him to make the first move. Cedric thought her behavior was weird, like she knew something. He was hoping he could find out something about Aaliyah when they all went to the capital together. He was dying to know what secrets this beautiful and eccentric woman was hiding. Suddenly, a kid's shout broke them out of their thoughts. Some kids were playing around, and the boy's sister was asking if he was having fun. Aaliyah found the whole thing super sweet, and she smiled, totally relaxed. But Cedric was all tense, wanting to just grill Aaliyah, but he was nervous. And just as he finally worked up the nerve and reached for her hand, the girl suddenly jumped up, saying she'd recharged, and suggested they move on. Then she called out to Caleb, who was staring off into the distance. The kid was so engrossed in something that he didn't even hear Aaliyah calling him at first. So the girl started looking in that direction herself, trying to figure out what had caught his attention. Just past the stall, this dude was making lollipops and selling them to kids. They were lemon and honey flavored, and Aaliyah remembered that Caleb was crazy about lemons. She figured the kid probably liked sweets too, but was just shy about asking for one. So she took the lead and suggested they buy Caleb one of those lollipops. The kid lit up, just as Cedric chimed in that street food wasn't safe. Aaliyah shot him a slightly annoyed look, since that's pretty much all she ate. And Cedric noticed his brother's mood instantly tank, so he immediately backtracked, saying lollipops were really refreshing and could clear your head. Yeah, he had to get all philosophical just to make up with his brother and not look like a jerk. Caleb got his lollipop right away, and the vendor was all like, "Damn, this kid's a real looker." The little Duke was super polite, thanked him for the candy, and was ready to chow down right then and there. His sweet little voice and that cute face just melted the Candyman's heart. Then the three of them sat back down, while the kiddo savored his treat. And in that moment, Aaliyah felt like they were a real family, happy even without all the fancy titles. Then she noticed some more kids heading toward the stand, wanting a lollipop. And these two kids looked like they were brother and sister. Aaliyah loved watching them, and she remembered her own little brother again. But then she figured out those kids were short on cash, because the sister only bought a lollipop for her brother, not getting one for herself, and she even refused to let him share, telling him to eat the whole thing himself. Cedric saw that weird look on his bride's face again, and asked her what was up. But she just asked them both to hang out there for a minute. She went over to the counter, bought another lollipop, and handed it to that little girl. Her little brother was psyched that his sister could have some candy too, but the girl herself got shy. She felt awkward taking a treat from a stranger. Still, she took the gift and thanked the kind lady for her generosity. After that, they said goodbye, and Aaliyah got ready to head back to her dukes. Cedric, meanwhile, was watching his bride and getting more and more surprised. And the vendor struck up a friendly conversation with her, figuring she was in town with her family for a vacation. He recommended checking out this square with a fountain that had an awesome view. Cedric couldn't hear what they were saying. He just saw their smiles and got a little jealous. Aaliyah explained to the vendor that there were bad rumors going around about that square. Trying to get some intel, he admitted that the atmosphere in the capital was tense, and all the knights and soldiers were super busy. The vendor himself couldn't believe that Princess Daphne had been kidnapped. Aaliyah didn't get how a commoner knew about the kidnapping, though maybe there was a poster up or something. The Marinist family is one of the three that back the Empire. Plus, Daphne saved the prince. So, the fact that this girl was kidnapped was a real blow to the family. But only the inner circle knows the truth. Aaliyah decided to ask a few more questions when that kid walked up to her. Meanwhile, Cedric started getting anxious that his fiancée wasn't coming back, and decided to go find her himself. The boy then whispered to her that he had a gift for her. He was touched. She bought his sister a lollipop. It meant a lot to him. Aaliyah thanked him and promised to cherish the gift, then held out her hand for something small. The gift turned out to be a regular old beetle, and since Aaliyah was terrified of cockroaches, even in her past life, she immediately went white as a sheet. Then, her piercing scream echoed, which freaked Cedric out. She really wanted to throw the bug, but she didn't want to hurt the boy's feelings either, even though it grossed her out. Explaining to Cedric that she was screaming from excitement, she panicked, accidentally lost her footing, and started falling backwards. Seeing this, Cedric rushed to her so fast, his hat flew right off his head. Everyone else immediately noticed the situation, realizing the lady might get hurt. But luckily, the Duke managed to use magic before she cracked her head open on the curb. Aaliyah was suspended in midair because anti-gravity was now affecting her. The Duke wouldn't have made it in time by just running, so he saved her this way, which he then apologized for. But Aaliyah was actually grateful her brains weren't splattered all over the sidewalk, though she kinda wished the Duke hadn't used magic. But like in those romance novels, caught her himself. That's why she was feeling a little bummed out. However, right now, the vendor noticed that the Duke had used magic, and he was starting to guess who was standing in front of him when some guy snapped at him to shut up. Still, that doesn't change the fact that the man recognized the Indigentia family, and Aaliyah felt awkward because they got caught so stupidly. Then those men introduced themselves. The vendor was called Alonzo, and the other one was Jordan, and it looked like nobody else even noticed the whole thing went down. But the Duke and his lady admitted they snuck out here to get some answers. Then Aaliyah turned to Alonzo, figuring he knew something, like maybe he knew the princess got snatched. Now, he couldn't just weasel his way out of it, because she clearly heard what he said. So Alonzo confessed he was selling candy in another district, and a customer mentioned it. A carriage coming back from the Imperial Palace just vanished into thin air right in front of the guy. Aaliyah thought that was a pretty weird way to kidnap someone. Plus, there was this figure standing perfectly still at the scene, completely covered in a robe, who also just disappeared. The robe description matched the fairy's outfit from the novel. At first, people figured magic was used to move the carriage, since the family is all about magic. But judging by the situation, kidnapping's a better explanation. The guy who told us about it came from the Elphium Square Gate, and since they're doing construction there, he had to come down the main road, where the magic power conduit is. Because of the construction, nobody's been near that spot for days. Aaliyah knew there'd be fewer witnesses there, but that guy definitely screwed up. The main magic conduit carries magic from the Emperor's castle to the residential areas. The path is lined with magic stones that prevent uncontrolled magic use in the castle. If you use magic nearby, the stones will pick up traces of the person who used it. You need strong magic to see those traces, and Cedric was a perfect fit. Still, he wanted to be sure the candy seller was telling him the truth. The guy swore up and down he'd never seen anything like it, but everything he said was the truth. So Cedric thanked him for the info and slid him a pouch. It was packed with gold coins, and Alonzo and his partner were stoked they could help out. After that, they started saying their goodbyes, because they still had a ton of stuff to do. But Caleb suddenly froze and started staring at the lollipops again. Alonzo caught the kid's gaze and realized he wanted some more candy. The vendor wanted to give the little Duke a treat, but his buddy started elbowing him, telling him not to give stuff away for free. Still, Caleb got his precious lollipop, and with a goofy grin, he promised he'd definitely eat it. Then the Dukes headed towards the plaza, which wasn't that far away. On the way, Cedric just blurts out, asking if that's what Aaliyah was talking about with Alonzo when she went up to him. She admits that the vendor also recommended a few parks that are great for family walks. Hearing that, the Duke chills out a bit and even cracks a sweet smile. Looks like Aaliyah didn't catch on that he was just jealous and had no idea why he'd ask something like that. Meanwhile, Calvados Marinest dug up some dirt on the Indigentia family, and after gathering some guys, he decided they're heading out right now to find his daughter. Elsewhere, in some creepy place, Daphne's tied up and blindfolded, just to be safe. The girl couldn't figure out where she was, and she was completely pinned down. All she knew was she'd been kidnapped, but she had no clue why. Still, Daphne tried to stay calm, believing her dad would definitely find her and come to the rescue. The princess knew she was in a cellar, just like before. She could tell by the stale, frigid air. But she also knew it wasn't the Imperial Palace dungeon. There wasn't this kind of stink there. Meanwhile, the figure in the dark cloak who kidnapped Daphne was trekking through the forest. Stoked that everything was going according to plan, all that was left was to wait for one person, and things would be set right. Hearing footsteps behind them, the figure was pleased that the one they were waiting for had arrived. But it turned out to be Duke Indigence, and that filled the cloaked person with dread. The kidnapper was immediately caught in a gravity magic trap and slammed face first into the dirt. Cedric told him not to move, so he didn't break anything, and Aaliyah was thrilled they'd found the scumbag. Then the Duke explained to the kidnapper that they'd followed his magic trail, the path of his magic supply. That's how he pinpointed his location, and now everyone could see that the kidnapper was Marquis Babylon. He was furious that the guilds he'd begged for help still left a trail, and Cedric demanded he explain where Princess Marinest was right now. But Reynold just kept cursing the Duke for screwing up all his plans again. In the novel, the Marquise was at one point called a future Grand Mage, and even as an adult, he lived thinking he was superior to everyone around him. Trying to prove himself, he put others down. But then Cedric showed up, a true genius. Even as a kid, he noticed that the Marquis's magic left traces behind, and advised him to put in more effort. then Reynold could strengthen the spell. Then, Cedric showed off his family's unique magic, the one he'd only seen once. Not realizing how complex the magic was, the kid just used it like breathing, without a second thought. He eventually became this super powerful mage, but that's all ancient history now. After Cedric got cursed, the Marquis started using him like a total pawn, and now Reynold was straight up furious that the Duke messed up his whole scheme. But what really set him off was seeing Aaliyah standing over him, looking all smug. The Marquis was now convinced that everything went south the second this commoner showed up. He glared at her like some rabid dog about to sink its teeth into her leg. Aaliyah was a little shocked that Reynold was behind everything, but they still needed to find Daphne. Cedric repeated his demand, telling the Marquis to spill where he stashed Princess Marie-Nest. Reynold just hissed through his teeth, confident that his plan was still gonna work out. He then said they needed to head up to the cabin, and that's where they'd find Daphne. So, naturally, the heroes were all hyped to head out right away and rescue the kidnapped girl. But the Marquis was actually playing the long game, trying to stall. Later, Daphne heard someone coming, but she just figured it was her kidnapper. But then she noticed those guys were struggling with the door, so it had to be someone coming to save her. And yeah, Aaliyah was definitely wrestling with the lock for a while, probably because it had some kind of magic seal on it. She got so pissed that the lock wouldn't budge, she just went full beast mode and ripped it off the hinges. Cedric and Caleb were both totally stunned, staring at this seemingly delicate girl. Then she flung the door open, and a rush of fresh air poured into the musty room. Just then, the daylight hit Daphne's face, tied up as she was. She heard someone promising to free her, and that voice sounded super familiar. Turns out, Aaliyah and those dukes weren't the saviors after all. When they barged into that rundown shack, it was completely empty. But then, the Marchioness Jiril showed up for Daphne, telling the princess not to be scared anymore, because she was there to get her. Later, the pissed-off dukes went back to the Marquis, who was still glued to the ground, and they demanded an explanation for why he lied to them, since the hideout was a bust. He grumbled that he was keeping her way out of their reach, and no one would find her. Then he turned to Lady Aaliyah, his voice dripping with anger. He said he couldn't stand hearing her voice anymore, and told her to back off now. He told the dukes not to trust Aaliyah, saying she was brainwashing them and falsely accusing his daughter. The Marquis also decided to pin Princess Marie-Nest's kidnapping on Aaliyah. Meanwhile, Jiril was also telling Daphne that Lady Aaliyah, the Duke's fiancée, ordered her kidnapping. She claimed this girl hired the Dark Guild to do it, and that's how the kid ended up in this dump. Daphne couldn't believe the future Duchess was capable of that, but Jiril kept insisting. Apparently, as soon as Aaliyah found out the princess could break the curse on Cedric, she decided to get rid of her. Jiril also complained about how that girl threatened them and asked them to take the job, but they refused. And almost crying, she claimed that Aaliyah accused her of mistreating the little Duke. That's why she didn't find out about the princess's kidnapping right away, and she's super sorry. For some reason, Duke Marie-Nest and Marquis Babylon have maintained pretty good relations, but since there was no mutual benefit, there were rumors they were planning some kind of joint operation. That's exactly why Reynold was so confident he'd win. Princess Marie-Nest had known Jiriel since they were kids, so she had no reason to doubt her. Daphne even taught Jiriel the prince's mirror shield magic. The imperial family trusted the Marie-Nests, and the Marie-Nests trusted the Babylons. And there's no way Duke Marie-Nest is gonna let this whole thing slide once he hears about it. Even Cedric and Caleb can't do anything about it, since it'll be an imperial order, and that's game over for Aaliyah. But right now, the Duke brothers don't believe a damn word of what the Marquis is saying about Aaliyah being involved in the kidnapping. On the contrary, they figured the Babylons planned the kidnapping and were just trying to pin it on her. Still, the girl couldn't shake this feeling of dread. Caleb took her hand and told her not to worry, promising that he and his brother would take care of everything. His smile gave Aaliyah a boost of confidence and cheered her up. And she was super proud of this kid, believing in her honesty, ready to stand up for her. Still, she was freaking out about what was happening to Daphne. Aaliyah was so caught up with the fairy, she totally spaced on how the princess was doing. She was praying those guys weren't hurting the girl, just to get her to testify against her. But then Aaliyah remembered how bummed Reynold looked when he saw them, so he was waiting for someone else. So, Daphne's probably somewhere in this forest, but she didn't have time to wait for the Marquis to confess. The girl took off, telling the dukes she was gonna head up a little higher to get a better look around. And she confessed she suspected the princess was nearby. Cedric got anxious, because his future wife was heading into the woods alone, but she told him not to worry and promised she'd be right back. Caleb went after her, gotta make sure she's safe and all, which gave Cedric the opening he needed to deal with that scumbag Babylon. And Babylon was just smirking, saying the guy he's been waiting for is almost here, and then everything will fall into place. Reynold and his daughter were already tasting victory, and the Marchioness was telling Daphne to get the hell out of there. to just run somewhere safer. But what the Babylons didn't realize is that Princess Marinist had gone back in time. So naturally, she wasn't buying a single word the young Marchioness was saying. Gerald was floored, because she was really trying to convince the kid she was on her side. But Marinist just kept saying she wasn't gonna believe a word she said. The Marchioness didn't see that coming, and she swore she had no reason to lie, and that the girl had to trust her. Daphne sighed hard, knowing she couldn't reveal she'd gone back in time. But she admitted she used to trust the Marchioness, because she looked after her. But things were different now. She remembered perfectly when the Marchioness revealed her true colors. That's when she snapped and confessed she really didn't like a kid who couldn't even use magic. Now, Daphne realized this woman was trying to frame an innocent person using her, and she declared that from this point on, she wouldn't let her be deceived anymore. Gerald was bewildered. The girl who'd recently lacked confidence was now ruining her plans. And while she was figuring out how to fix the situation, the little one tried to slip away. But the Marchioness grabbed her arm and glared with such rage, like she was about to pin her to the wall. Then she loudly demanded she believe her, stating she wouldn't let her go alone. Her eyes softened. Her voice turned sweet again, and she tried to talk Daphne into cooperating. She kept saying it was all a misunderstanding, and that they were doing this for the princess's own good. For some reason, Daphne was swayed by the Marchioness's voice and followed her, not knowing where they were going. But then she remembered being behind bars in her past life, and her father telling her to escape. In that instant, she yanked her hand away and bolted from the Marchioness. Luckily, the door wasn't locked, and the princess managed to get outside. She found herself in the middle of the forest and started looking for a way back to the capital. That's when these guys in robes showed up, sent by Marquis Babylon, supposedly to rescue the princess. They also started trying to convince Daphne to come with them to a safe place. Right then, she remembered how the knights had invited her in exactly the same way, and realized it was a trap. The kid bolted, running the other way, trying to get as far as possible from those bastards. Just then, the Marchioness, looking like a total mess, burst out of their shack, yelling to grab the princess. Gerald was determined to get the girl to trust her again. Otherwise, they were all screwed. And Daphne was running through the woods. Again, knowing she had to get the hell out of there. She couldn't figure out why this kind of crap kept happening to her. All she wanted was a normal life. Ironic, ain't it? Princess Marinist was back at the edge of that same damn cliff. For a second, she panicked, and she could hear Jeriel and her goons closing in behind her. Daphne glanced back again to see how close they were getting. She tripped again and went tumbling over the edge. The Marchioness freaked out. This wasn't just kidnapping anymore. This was gonna be princess murder. Daphne was falling, thinking how she wanted to change her fate. But everything always ends up the same. She braced for death, hoping she wouldn't have to go through this ever again. Then, out of nowhere, Aaliyah grabbed her hand. Daphne saw her pink hair and jewel-like eyes, and she had a pretty good idea who it was. Aaliyah was stoked she caught the little thing, even if it meant they were both going down. But she flipped them, so the princess was on top, hoping the fall wouldn't hurt too bad. Just then, Cedric's arms scooped her up, and he started chewing her out for always acting so reckless. Of course he was freaking out. His bride could have been seriously hurt if he hadn't made it. Aaliyah just thanked the Duke for coming to her rescue again. Cedric couldn't stay mad for long. All that mattered was that this girl was okay now. Then, Aaliyah asked where Caleb had gotten off to. Gerald spotted them from above, totally confused how they ended up there, her face a mask of pure terror. Her servants started whispering, planning to bail before they got in even deeper. They tried to teleport out quick, but the move failed and they face-planted on the ground. Duke Caleb approached them. The air so thick, you could feel the earth trembling under his boots. His face was burning with rage, and he told them not to even think about running. Meanwhile, Aaliyah gave the princess a quick once-over, hoping she wasn't hurt. Daphne herself was starting to wonder how those two had even gotten there, and Aaliyah explained everything they had to do to find the princess and rescue her. Now, the future Duchess was genuinely relieved that the little one was okay, but then it hit her. They hadn't even been introduced. So she announced she was Duke Cedric's fiancée. Daphne was still a little shell-shocked and asked the lady to take her hand. After that, they decided to head for a safe location. And holding on to Aaliyah, the princess felt an incredible and comforting warmth coming from her. She'd tried to escape alone before, but now she actually felt safe for the first time. Aaliyah noticed the princess was trembling a bit and realized she was still scared. Then, she quietly asked Cedric what was up with the Marquise, since his daughter and servants were definitely plotting something. Turns out, the Duke was dragging Reynold behind them like he was tied to a balloon with magic. Cedric also told her not to worry about Gerald, since she was already being taken care of too. And after they walked a little further, the princess was in for a pleasant surprise. After pushing past another bunch of bushes, she spotted her dad, who was also out looking for her. Aaliyah was a little stunned, not understanding how Duke Calvados ended up here, but she was super happy, rushing into her dad's arms like a little kid, and he almost cried, so relieved she was okay. All he did was apologize to his daughter for showing up so late. Aaliyah figured that Duke Marinest had followed the magical trail, just like they had. But everything's fine now, and she was even glad she convinced Cedric to head to the capital. Just then, Calvados noticed her and Cedric. He gave them a real stern look, and even chewed them out, saying they had no shame. Clearly, he thought these two had done something with his daughter, and he was about to take them out. He started powering up his magic, and Cedric told Aaliyah to hide behind him, but she started begging Duke Marinus to listen to them out, except he wasn't having it. He was convinced these people were trying to shift the blame. I get it, he's too worried about Daphne to think straight, and as a father, he's not letting this go. Aaliyah started racking her brain, trying to figure out how to calm this guy down so she could explain everything later. But then Daphne herself stepped in, grabbing her dad's face. She got his attention and told him to knock it off with the rampage. Cedric and Aaliyah were in shock, but figured this could only be a good thing. And then the girl started pleading with her dad not to attack the Dukes of Indigentia. Then she confessed that they weren't the ones who kidnapped her, and that Marquise Babylon was actually behind it all. Calvados found out that the Marquise was also planning on framing the Indigentias for the kidnapping. The kid spilled the beans on how she escaped, saying she fell off a cliff, and these guys saved her. Then she wanted to know why her dad trusts Babylon so blindly, considering he's the main villain. That got Aaliyah curious too, because the original novel didn't have any info on that. But she knew damn well why Calvados didn't trust them when she saw Cedric barely holding back his rage. Just then, little Caleb walked out into the clearing, bathed in the sunset. Aaliyah was stoked that the kid finally showed up and started grilling him on where he'd been hiding. But Caleb ignored her and turned to Calvados, saying he knew the reason for his actions. The Duke of Marinesta and his daughter were totally lost, not understanding what the kid was rambling about. And Aaliyah got freaked out by how her little buddy's voice sounded all of a sudden. With a furious look on his face, the junior duke demanded Calvados answer his questions. Caleb knew this was a messed up situation, but he couldn't ignore the fact that a member of the Indigentia family was suspected of kidnapping. And getting closer, the kid declared he was filing a complaint against Duke Marinest over this whole incident. Calvados, though, finally got the picture and admitted he jumped to conclusions. Ever since Cedric got hit with that curse, our family's relationship has been kinda superficial. Calvados figured they wanted revenge, so he bought the Marcus's story. Cedric decided this was the perfect moment to hear the Babylon squirm and make excuses. He snapped his fingers, and Reynold went sprawling on the ground. Gerald landed next to him, and they both looked scared stiff, but pissed off too. The Marquis started hissing that he could explain everything, but only after the gravity magic was lifted. He just wanted to get his weight off the ground and stand up straight already. But Caleb accused him of a serious crime against the princess and his own family. We're talking treason here, and the Marcus's family will be handed over to the official aristocratic court. Just then, out of nowhere, the Golden Lion Knights showed up and demanded Calvados explain what was going on. Aaliyah was hoping that would be the end of it, but her thoughts were interrupted by Gerald, who started whining, begging for mercy. And if Aaliyah hadn't known what this woman had done before, she might have actually felt something, but she didn't feel an ounce of pity for these scumbags, and she silently turned away. Then Daphne approached her, realizing she still hadn't thanked Aaliyah for saving her. She also asked if the future Duchess was hurt, but Aaliyah assured her she was perfectly fine. Then, a little quieter, Daphne confessed she wanted to ask the girl for a favor. Eli became curious and happily agreed. Turns out, the princess wanted to call her savior Sis, and was now asking permission. This was pretty unexpected for Eli, but she said yes, because she liked the idea too. After that, they were planning to head back to the duchy using Cedric's magic. And Daphne got a little sad, realizing she wanted to spend a bit more time with this girl. She'd never forget how she jumped in after her. Not everyone would do that for a stranger. Plus, Eli kept giving her these sweet smiles, happy she was okay. The girl wanted to get closer to this lady, but she couldn't get closer than the Indigenia family. Just then, Cedric came over and called out to Eli. He also turned to Princess Marinest, clearly stoked that she was okay now. He even dropped to one knee in front of her, showing the girl some serious respect. That's when Daphne got the guts to say something to Lord Cedric, but she whispered it in his ear so no one would hear, and Aaliyah was dying to know what it was. Cedric was super surprised after that, and Daphne added it would be really useful intel for him. After they said their goodbyes, Aaliyah tried to pry out of the Duke what the little princess had told him, but Cedric wasn't spilling, and it started to bug her. Then he stopped, looked her in the eye, and told her never to go rogue again. She knew herself that going solo would be breaking their contract. What she didn't get was that Cedric just didn't want her in harm's way. Smooth move, changing the subject and suggesting we wait for Caleb, who's vanished somewhere. The kid was just watching the princess, grumbling about how he didn't like any of this. By the time they got back to the duchy, it was late, and Aaliyah stepped out onto the balcony. She was thinking about how much had happened today, still not getting why so many characters were suddenly all up in her business. But on the bright side, she was glad Daphne was okay now, and she didn't have to worry about her. Then Aaliyah started feeling super sleepy, and was about to head to bed when Cedric suddenly decided to pay her a visit. He apologized for showing up so late unannounced, but he needed to talk to her. Not sure what could be so important at this hour, Aaliyah assured him that he wasn't bothering her, and the Duke was all like, "How are you feeling?" Which was kinda weird because she was fine, just a little tired. But she dug Cedric showing concern, so she smiled sweetly and thanked him for worrying about her. Then she admitted she couldn't sleep and got lost watching the moon, then invited him in. They went out on the balcony together and just chilled, gazing at the night sky, watching shooting stars now and then. And every so often, Cedric would glance at Aaliyah, admitting the moon was really something. That made her happy, because ever since she'd ended up in this place, she's been staring at the night sky a lot and can't get enough of how beautiful it is. That's when Cedric dropped the bomb that they needed to tie the knot ASAP. Given the situation, the Duke explained to his bride-to-be that the Babylons would soon be gone from the duchy, and the Marquis had pulled, which means his followers are gonna vanish too, so the duchy's population is gonna take a major hit. Aaliyah got kinda curious about what's gonna happen to Marcus Babylon. I mean, it's pretty obvious, he's not gonna dodge the death penalty for the crap he pulled. It gave her the creeps a little, but she was hoping it wouldn't affect her. Then, as she fixed her hair, Cedric spotted a scratch on her arm and started asking when she got hurt. It probably happened in the woods, but the Duke still looked worried sick. She reassured him that it was just a tiny scratch, and she was totally fine. Then out of nowhere, Cedric apologized to her. Ever since she arrived, dangerous stuff keeps going down, and it bugged him that he couldn't protect her better. His face was so serious in that moment, and Aaliyah just wanted to see him smile. And then she touched the corners of his mouth with her fingers, stretching his skin into a smile. It made her laugh, but she told Cedric that he looked way better smiling. She also made sure he knew he didn't need to apologize, because all of this was a result of her choices. Besides, she was the one who initially said they should save Daphne, and Cedric just agreed with her decision. Seeing his confusion, Aaliyah promised him that from now on, only good things would happen to them. The guy sighed in relief and thanked his fiancée for her kind words, because just like he thought, she turned out to be a good person, no matter what anyone said about her. And since it was getting late and cooler, Aaliyah suggested they head back inside. Cedric had noticed they'd been talking for a while too, and praised her again for her work today. And when he called her a good person again, suddenly she got a lump in her throat. She never forgot she was the reason for his curse, and she could only apologize to him in her mind. She wished she could confess that she wasn't the person he thought she was. Aaliyah realized she'd strayed a bit from her main goal, freeing Sirdik from the curse. Meanwhile, somewhere else, looking real grim thanks to the time of night, a certain blue-haired lady just got the report on the future Duchess Aaliyah. The maid who brought the news was clearly terrified of catching her mistress's wrath, but she let her go and started thinking about the Duke Indigencia's bride. It was the Empress, and for some reason, she really didn't like the name she'd heard today. A few days later, the verdict came down for the kidnappers of Lady Marinist. The whole family was executed, and the Marquis's head was put on public display. Aaliyah was just glad they got back to the duchy so fast, and didn't have to see that crap firsthand. Now that Marquis Babylon's influence was gone, she and Cedric could finally chill and get ready for the wedding. A lot had changed in the duchy since then too. Aaliyah even made some new friends, some high society ladies who were totally digging her look. They wanted to help her plan the wedding, but first they wanted to gossip over some tea. But the future Duchess had other stuff going on, so they agreed to catch up another time. Mostly, Olivia was the one helping Aaliyah out, and they'd actually become pretty good friends. Even the vassals, who were totally against the wedding before, had changed their tune. Now they're acting like they can't wait for the big day to finally happen. And all those judgy glares that used to be aimed at Caleb? Gone. Looks like the reason they were so nasty was because they were on Reynolds' payroll. This sudden change in attitude pissed her off, but she was still relieved it all worked out. The wedding preparations were finally done, and they could just chill and enjoy their days. Aaliyah couldn't get Cedric's words out of her head, that she was a good person. She was bored out of her mind, so she decided to whip up something for Cedric. Before long, she showed up to the brothers with a tray. She'd made a little snack and suggested they all hang out for tea. Cedric loved that she cared, but he didn't want her to wear herself out. Aaliyah, like always, said it wasn't a big deal, as especially since she wanted to make some goodies. Caleb, not one to turn down a treat from his favorite girl, snatched up a cookie to try it. The girl loved seeing the kid chow down, and she was happy Cedric was enjoying it too. The Duke was a little taken aback, wondering how she knew what he was feeling, and she explained to him that it was written all over his face, because whenever he tries something she's made, his expression immediately becomes content and peaceful. Cedric was still a little surprised though. I mean, Aaliyah's only known him a short time, but she's picked up on things he doesn't even know about himself. This girl just kept becoming more of an enigma to him, and he was dying to figure her out. Once they settled at the tea table, Aaliyah was informed that the madam from the salon had arrived. She was scheduled to try on wedding dresses that had been delivered earlier than she expected. Caleb wanted to go with Aaliyah, but she reminded him he had his administration lesson coming up. The kid was a little thrown, but he wasn't gonna argue. It wasn't that he didn't want to go to class. It's just that time flies when he's around Aaliyah. She asked him to hang out after class, and Caleb's mood instantly improved. And she loved how this guy could still act like a total kid sometimes. Aaliyah went dress shopping with Cedric. It was really starting to hit her that her wedding day with Duke Indigencia was getting close. It felt unreal that she was marrying such a handsome dude. Plus, the wedding ceremony was planned on a massive scale, like some royal ball. Out of the blue, Cedric asked Aaliyah how she was feeling. He wanted to know if she was bummed out, and the question struck her as kinda weird. But then I remembered the last time she was trying on a dress. She said something similar. It's normal though, some brides get totally overwhelmed before the wedding. The madam at the salon told Cedric about it, so he figured his bride was feeling it too. I mean, usually weddings are in some dumpy hall, or the girls are marrying someone they hate. Plus, they might not even like how they look, so some brides just get all worked up. Aaliyah realized that Cedric really cared about making sure she was happy. That's probably why he was trying to gently ask her what was bugging her. The Duke looked Aaliyah straight in the eye and asked again what she was feeling right now. And she squealed that everything was perfect, hoping that would end the interrogation. She really was happy, but the Duke wanted to be absolutely sure nothing was weighing her down. Out of nowhere, she just blurts out that he's super handsome. She knew she said it without thinking, but it was true, even if she felt totally awkward now. But Cedric just took it in stride, even thanked his bride for being so honest. He wasn't done with his questions though. There was still something else he wanted to know. To avoid blurting out any more stuff, Aaliyah asked him to talk to Madame himself, because she had to see Olivia, and she bolted out of there before Cedric could say another word. She was feeling kinda weird looking at his cute face right now, and she could feel herself starting to blush like crazy. The Duke, left alone, remembered what Lady Marinus told him in the woods. According to her, Aaliyah really goes for guys with a great smile. That was a pretty unexpected confession for Cedric, but now he understood what Daphne was getting at. Remembering how Aaliyah herself said his smile really suited him, he realized he was way too serious all the time. Now it was starting to bug him big time, and all those words just kept echoing in his head. He also realized that his fiancée thought his smile was seriously hot, and it was in this thoughtful daze that Edwin, his assistant, found him while bringing some documents. He noticed the Duke had been acting weird lately and wanted to know what was bugging him so much. But no matter what Cedric was doing, every word from his fiancée just kept ringing in his ears. Then he headed to Madame Angela's, and she was surprised he came alone. The Duke explained that Lady Aaliyah would be along later, and the salon owner agreed to wait for her. But she also noticed that something was bothering the young master, and declared that his fiancé would never be down, since he's so damn handsome. The madame overheard their conversation by accident. The door was open. Angela's got more than enough skills to handle the indigenous family's wedding clothes. Even if she's just a commoner, it's hard to find an aristocrat who doesn't buy from her. Plus, she was happy to work for the Duke, since she wanted to learn more about Aaliyah. I mean, she's just a regular girl, but this handsome dude noticed her, and she loved it. Later, the dress fitting went off without a hitch, and Aaliyah could finally relax. And Olivia kept gushing about how gorgeous she'd be at the wedding, and what amazing taste she had. But Cedric's tux fitting wasn't done yet, and she was dying to see him in it. They were trying on their outfits separately, because you can't see the bride in her dress before the ceremony. She could see what her groom looks like though, but for now, she asked Olivia to remind her what else they had on the schedule. Turns out, after trying on the outfits, she and Cedric need to check out the honeymoon suite. Hearing that, Aaliyah almost choked on her tea. She'd completely forgotten that marriage isn't just a friendly hang, and she got super flustered when she pictured them going to that room together. Their marriage is contractual, sure, but they still gotta look like a real couple to everyone. And now they're gonna be living together in the same room, going forward. Just then, Cedric walked in, his shirt unbuttoned, and Aaliyah freaked out even more. He just heard his bride cough and rushed over to make sure she was okay, so he didn't have time to button up. Olivia explained that she just choked, and Cedric calmed down a little. Then they told him to head back to the fitting room since Aaliyah was fine. And Olivia was like, "Yo, hurry up with the fitting. We gotta check out the honeymoon suite." Hearing that, the Duke kind of froze. He'd totally spaced on that too. And Aaliyah was so freaking embarrassed again, she actually covered her face. For a second there, the room went dead silent. Even the maid shut her yap. That's when Madame Angela came over, giggling, because she knew why they were so awkward. Then she checked out Aaliyah and was like, "Damn, that's way different than what I heard. These two actually look like a seriously cute couple about to get hitched." After a while, they were finally done with the whole wedding dress fitting thing. Angela was super interested the whole time, seeing Cedric and Aaliyah doing this together. For a split second, she gave the bride a look. Kinda mysterious, you know? She confessed she was super worked up, because she heard Cedric was marrying a girl he was really into. Then the Madame asked if she could pick their brains about something. She was dying to know what made Miss Aaliyah fall for Mr. Cedric. That question totally caught the girl off guard, and she was speechless, like, what do I even say? Stuttering a bit, she started explaining that he was kind and, really good looking. Then they turned the same question around to Mr. Cedric. He loved that Aaliyah always put others first and really tried to understand them. Plus, she reaches out to people without hesitation. And Cedric thinks that's just the best thing ever. Seeing Aaliyah act like that is what slowly made him fall for her. That made Madame Angela really happy. Elijah was starting to sweat, thinking her fiancé was laying it on a little thick, and it was making her uncomfortable. All the while, she kept glancing at his face, which was so sweet and carefree at that moment. Elijah noticed again that the Duke had changed a lot lately, and after saying goodbye to Madame, they headed off to check out the honeymoon suite. After that, his assistant came up to him and asked how everything went. Cedric didn't feel like giving him a report and just dryly said everything was fine. But Edwin was stoked, which meant his hard work had paid off. Now he was here to update Cedric on a task he'd given him earlier. The Duke had almost forgotten about it, and Edwin reminded him it was about the investigation into Elijah's case. Then, dropping his head guiltily, he reported that he hadn't been able to find any information this time either. They grilled everyone in the villages around Miss Aaliyah's cabin. That kind of bummed out the Duke, but he wasn't super upset. And Edwin chimed in, saying she's not just some regular person, or they'd have dug up dirt on her by now. Cedric cut him off, told the aide not to get carried away with what he was saying. The guy apologized for overstepping and saying all that, but Cedric didn't chew him out, just told him to keep digging. He needed to know something about her. This woman was driving him nuts. Seemed so simple, but like she was hiding something huge. Meanwhile, Aaliyah was bored out of her mind, just twiddling her thumbs. Everyone else was busy, so she was just wandering around the halls, killing time. As she passed one room, she caught Caleb's voice, and he was totally talking about her. The door was cracked open, and curiosity got the better of her, so she peeked in to hear what the kid was saying. Turns out, he was totally alone in the room. His face was dead serious, and he was holding that notebook he lugs around everywhere. The little Duke writes something in that thing every single day. Just then, Caleb said there was something he couldn't believe, and that he was going to investigate it himself. Aaliyah freaked, realizing the kid was investigating her, and she was seriously scared that the young Duke might find out she's actually a fairy, especially since he's planning to keep digging into her, and she was terrified of what he might uncover. Then, Caleb walked out of the room, and Aaliyah ducked behind the door so he wouldn't see her. Once he was out of sight, she decided to snag his notebook off the desk and see what was inside. She didn't want to snoop through someone else's journal, but the situation was so messed up, she had no choice. Closing her eyes for a second before looking at the pages, Aaliyah prayed she was wrong about all this. And the first thing she read was that Caleb had managed to make it so she wouldn't have to diet. But he was worried she'd go back on a diet, since the wedding was coming up soon. The kid didn't want her to lose weight, and was planning to make sure she kept eating her dessert. Aaliyah actually had decided to watch her weight, but realized that Cedric and Caleb weren't gonna let that happen. Flipping through the other pages, she was sure the kid didn't suspect a thing. That just made him even sweeter in her eyes, and she decided to give him a big hug when she saw him. Then she read about the time they cooked together, and about when the three of them looked at the stars, which brought back a flood of memories for her. Aaliyah found out from the records that the boy's been having a blast lately. He's stoked that his brother looks healthier, and the whole duchy seems more alive. But Caleb was bummed that once Aaliyah helps lift the curse from his brother, their marriage would be over. But that means they'd have to split up, and the kid really didn't want her to leave the duchy. Aaliyah knew it too, but she was hoping everything would work out for the best. The rest of the time flew by, and before they knew it, it was the wedding day. Daphne Marie Nest was naturally invited to the ceremony, and she looked happier than anyone. Even from a distance, she could tell the duchy was looking real fancy now. and she couldn't wait to see what the ceremony hall looked like, knowing they decorated it like royalty. Her dad, Calvados, on the other hand, was a little embarrassed that things didn't go according to plan. After Marquis Babylon got hauled into court, the Indigenia family made sure everyone knew about it. And because of that, all sorts of forgotten crap from the past started bubbling back up. The fact that Daphne Marinist was the reason Cedric got cursed in the first place? Pure gossip gold. But since the whole mess was tied directly to the Imperial family, nobody was running their mouth too much. People couldn't believe Cedric was even helping Calvados after everything that went down. I mean, he never even got compensated for what happened back then, and now rumors about the two families were spreading like wildfire. The gossip hounds were eating up the local paper, trying to stay in the loop. The newspaper demand exploded so much that they opened a branch right in the capital, and they even got a compensation payout. Half the money went straight to the wedding venue, and Calvados felt like total dirt. He was dreading showing up at the wedding, knowing he couldn't even look them in the eye. But Daphne got an invite and wanted to go, so the Duke took her. Thing is, the girl wasn't all smiles the whole time. Daphne started flashing back to that night in the woods, when Calliope straight up told her she was thick-skinned. She didn't really get why he was coming at her like that. She reminded him he wasn't allowed to talk to her that way, then asked him to explain himself. The kid just kept glaring at her, totally pissed. Then, all harsh and with straight-up hate in his voice, he said it was her fault his brother was cursed. He knew Daphne and her dad were happy the prince was safe now, but Caleb was still messed up about his brother possibly dying because of it. Then, a little softer, the kid admitted that with Eli's arrival, Cedric had a shot at getting into the Knowledge Temple. He's gonna marry her and then figure out how to break this curse. That made Caleb happy, but it pissed him off that Daphne was still trying to get close to Aaliyah after everything. The girl explained that Aaliyah decided to save her all on her own, but Caleb insisted she had no choice, and even blamed the princess for falling off the cliff in the first place. And since Daphne cursed the man Aaliyah loves, she probably wouldn't have saved the girl willingly. These memories weighed so heavily on the princess that her father noticed. The boy warned her she was only invited so they could avoid bad rumors spreading. Caleb even told her not to get her hopes up, but she didn't want to believe him. The girl wanted to apologize to them all after what happened, but everyone scattered so fast. And now she's got her chance, because Daphne doesn't want Aaliyah to hate her. Meanwhile, Aaliyah was freaking out because the pearl dress felt super heavy. Olivia was lost. What else could she do? She'd already taken off almost all the pearls, but the lady was still so stressed. She was worried she couldn't even go through with the wedding. Seeing the maid's terrified face, though, she explained that she just blurted that out in a panic. Right then, Edwin, the assistant, showed up, and he proudly announced that he knew it was tough for Lady Aaliyah, so he'd ask the Archduke for help. Only then did she notice Caleb standing next to the assistant. Edwin then suggested using gravity magic to make the wedding dress feel lighter. Olivia and Angela totally dug that idea. Aaliyah tried to object, still freaking out, but Caleb was already ready to start casting the spell. Even with all the jitters, they were still hoping this wedding would go off without a hitch. Cedric, decked out in his best, was already in the hall, waiting for the ceremony to kick off, and Aaliyah had agreed to use her gravity magic. Once everything was set, she was stoked that nothing was pulling her down, feeling totally weightless. Even though it seemed a little weird to use magic at a wedding, she was seriously digging it right now. She thanked Caleb for his help, and he was just happy he could do something for Aaliyah. Now she could finally marry Cedric without a worry. That's when the kid suddenly got serious and turned to Aaliyah. He grabbed her hand and said if his brother ever gave her any grief in the future, he'd give him a piece of his mind. She knew Caleb was just looking out for her, and thanked him for being so upfront. After that, he was stoked that the three of them could live in the Duke's castle forever. Aaliyah got a little antsy about the forever part, but figured he was just talking. She figured it was because everyone was staring at them, so she decided to play along. Giving him a sweet smile, she declared that they really would live together happily ever after. With that settled, it was time to head to the actual ceremony. Duke Cedric stood in the hall, waiting for his bride, and noticed all the invited guests eyeing him. It even made him a little uncomfortable, the way everyone was starting to gawk. It's just that the ladies couldn't take their eyes off him, now that they were sure he really was that handsome. The noblewomen couldn't believe he was actually getting married, but it was in the papers, so it must be true. Other ladies were scared to get close because of the curse, but this one commoner wasn't afraid. Before long, Edwin the assistant announced the arrival of Aaliyah, the bride. The girl in the elaborate dress was escorted by little Caleb, who looked super proud. Cedric, seeing his bride, froze in shock. She looked unbelievably gorgeous. The guests gasped too, but kept quiet, silently admiring the lady in her wedding gown. The Duke noticed that she actually looked like a fairy right now, and when she got close to him, he felt a little odd. almost like he was nervous, but Caleb's happy look let him know that everything should go perfectly. Then, Cedric drew his bride closer and gazed into her eyes with deep affection. She announced that they were finally getting married and laughed cheerfully. But then she saw the strange look on the groom's face and got worried, not understanding what could be bothering him. The Duke realized he was spacing out, but snapped back to it and smiled at her. Cedric was grateful for Aaliyah's help, but she had other things on her mind. Once this wedding's over, she can get into the Temple of Knowledge and find her lost memories. That's how she'll break Cedric's curse, and he and his brother can finally live happily. Then they turned towards the altar, where the priest was waiting for them, and the girl felt happy for the time she'd spent back at the duchy. It was a relief to her that she'd made it here without blowing her cover, and now she was hoping she could fix the mistake she made with her own hands back then. Right as she was thinking this, Cedric thought Aaliyah looked like something was bothering her. But then Edwin's voice boomed out, announcing that the bride and groom were taking their first steps towards a new life. At the ceremony, Cedric and Aaliyah decided to skip a few formalities to speed things up. Later, Cedric asked if she was all right, admitting he'd noticed she seemed preoccupied. Aaliyah explained she was just worn out by the long-winded welcome speech. That put the Duke at ease. Then she suggested they hurry up and get rid of the curse. After that, they could grab some good food, and Cedric was all for that idea. As they geared up for the next step, they suddenly spotted someone lurking, their face hidden in the shadows. Aaliyah didn't recognize him and figured he was just a late guest. But the Duke knew this guy. Caleb, seeing another person show up, got suspicious too. The unexpected guest crashing their wedding turned out to be Her Highness the Empress's servant. Aaliyah found that weird, since the Imperial Palace had said they wouldn't be at the wedding. Looking at this guy, the girl got a really bad feeling. The servant delivered the Empress's congratulations on the union of Duke Cedric and Lady Aaliyah. She also sent her apologies for not being able to attend the wedding ceremony in person. Plus, she reported they'd found traces of an uninvited guest at the Temple of Knowledge. But this person couldn't be identified by the Imperial family. So, to find him, the Imperial Palace decided to temporarily close the Temple of Knowledge. The guests who heard all this were shocked, not understanding why they were being told now. It's like they specifically wanted to get this across, and Aaliyah thought so too. I mean, everyone knows how important this marriage is for Cedric to figure out how to break his curse. And deciding to close the temple means the Empress is keeping tabs on his curse. She's probably pissed it might get called off, which means she hates the Indigentia family. When the curse hit, the royal family ignored Cedric's protests, so they're dismissive of him. Then, the Empress's servant announced they could continue the ceremony, but the mood was already ruined, and Aaliyah decided she wasn't letting it slide. She tried to go after that servant to get some answers, but tripped and Cedric barely caught her. And the guests just figured she was so shaken up on such a big day that she could barely walk. Truth is, Aaliyah was just rushing, but either way, that guy was already gone. Later, Cedric found out from his aide that the Empress's servant had returned to the palace. Edwin was so ticked off himself that he wanted to grab the jerk and deal with him. The Duke told his aide to chill, even though he wouldn't mind having a word with that guy himself. That's when Edwin told Cedric to pay more attention to Lady Aaliyah. The Duke thought about it and agreed his aide was right. She'd been through hell. Once Edwin was alone, he got the feeling the young master was having doubts. Meanwhile, on the way back, Cedric remembered Aaliyah acting like everything was fine after the news. But she couldn't hide the look on her face at that damn moment. The Duke knew it himself. No one's okay after going through something like that. He could see his wife was anxious and wanted to do something to make her feel comfortable. At the same time, he was scared that after everything, Aaliyah would want to bolt from the duchy. So when he headed to the room where she was a little surprised by what he saw. The girl was sitting at a table piled high with food, stuffing her face. Caleb and Daphne were sitting nearby, acting as her support squad, shoving candy at her. Then Cedric spotted Olivia and the head chef, fussing over the young mistress like crazy. The Duke was standing there, bewildered, not really grasping what was going on. Aaliyah, when she saw Cedric walk in, was super happy and wanted to chat with him for a bit. From the outside, her mood seemed totally normal, like she hadn't just gotten some awful news. The girl convinced the Duke to take a walk with her in the garden, where they could talk properly. Under the sunlight, in the fresh air, they both felt a bit of relief. Aaliyah started by praising the servants who were taking care of her, even though they were a little clumsy. She also understood Cedric's worries and asked him not to stress out so much. But he couldn't help but worry, and he hoped that this girl would never leave them. That's when it hit him. He was being way too selfish. Suddenly, Aaliyah stopped dead in her tracks, like she'd remembered something, and asked her husband to wait a second. Before he knew it, she'd woven a flower crown and plopped it on Cedric's head. The Duke was a little embarrassed, but Aaliyah was beaming like a kid, saying it really suited him. She explained that his face was like a thundercloud, and and she just wanted to lighten the mood a little. They both knew someone was trying to screw them over, now that they were getting closer to breaking the curse. But Aaliyah still kept taking care of Cedric, no matter what. And he realized he hadn't even been thinking about going to the temple soon, where he'd find a way to get rid of this curse. The Duke had only been thinking about the moment this girl would leave their family and wouldn't be around anymore. He knew this relationship was doomed, but his heart still ached at the thought. Aaliyah cut through his thoughts, asking what he knew about laurel wreaths. She'd heard that in faraway lands, they give laurel wreaths to marathon winners. It means the winner went through hell to get there, and she said Cedric was basically running a marathon himself. She believed he'd make it to the finish line safe and sound, break the curse, and get his laurel wreath. The Duke felt that familiar awkwardness creeping in again. He'd come to Aaliyah to comfort her, but she ended up comforting him again. He thanked her sincerely for her concern, admitting he should be the one comforting her right now. He knew a wedding was a big deal, and that she was probably nervous. Like always, Aaliyah insisted she had a great time, because she probably wouldn't get another wedding like this in her life. Adding that she wasn't planning on finding another guy later, she realized she couldn't give her heart to anyone after Cedric. Her words were comforting, but deep down, the Duke was sweating bullets. Later, Aaliyah wondered who the hell broke into the Hall of Knowledge, but Cedric suspected that this perp would never be found, because he probably doesn't even exist. Or they'll just say he dropped dead instantly and the body was cremated, so there's no way to ID him. The Hall of Knowledge is where everything that happens is recorded, and it's actually a dragon's lair. That's why nobody goes in there. They say the Emperor once managed to befriend him, but in the original novel, Daphne befriended the dragon, and Aaliyah would also like to connect with him. At the same time, she understood that the imperial family couldn't stop them forever. Cedric agreed, but explained that this was kind of a warning shot. To keep everyone away from the Indigentia family, Aaliyah looked at her husband with pity. She didn't want him giving up halfway through, and it pissed her off that those bastards wouldn't let up and leave the Duke alone. She even started fantasizing about putting the Empress's portrait over her head like a hat. But then she tried to calm down, because they needed to think about how to solve this new problem. She knew the path to the Temple of Knowledge they'd chosen wasn't the only one. There's a teleporter in the Daphne Duchy's attic that she used in the original story to get to the temple. She remained undetected and even managed to befriend a dragon. But Daphne's the only one who knows that secret, and she'll get suspicious if Aaliyah says she knows the truth, especially if word gets out about a secret path to the temple. The Marinist family could be in danger. Aaliyah was going nuts from not being able to get her memories back. It would make things so much easier. Later, while strolling with the Duke, she remembered the Oath of Allegiance ceremony was tomorrow. Aaliyah wanted to figure out how to prepare, but Cedric suggested they just head back to the castle and chill. Aaliyah especially needed the rest, since she'd have to face the public again soon. Suddenly, it hit her. She had no clue how a Duke's wife should act in front of guests. Cedric told her not to sweat it, since they had the power to sway public opinion anyway. They could do that through the newspaper. Cedric didn't want pity, but he figured they needed to milk it while they could. Aaliyah replayed all the crap they'd been through and couldn't understand why misfortune haunted this family. Then she suggested they show everyone how bummed out they were that they couldn't go to the temple. To pull it off, they should cancel their honeymoon, and Cedric was down with the idea. But he didn't want to cancel the honeymoon. They'd been looking forward to it for ages. They were supposed to hit this legendary resort, the hottest spot everyone's talking about. Plus, it'll show everyone that Cedric and Aaliyah got married because they're in love. But she thought it wouldn't look right if they went on a trip after what happened. She thought it would be better to show everyone how devastated they were. Aaliyah knew it was a bit of a bummer, but it would be better for the Indigentia family. The Duke didn't rush to answer her suggestion, and it seemed to her that missing the honeymoon really bothered him. Aaliyah thought her decision was right, and now Cedric's mood was making her feel awkward. But he reassured her that everything was fine, and he also thought they should stick to her plan. She was happy he agreed, but didn't buy that he was hyped for the honeymoon. And while she was thinking, Cedric asked her to promise him something. Since they couldn't take their wedding trip right now, Cedric wanted her to go on vacation with him after they hit up the Temple of Knowledge. Basically, they'd be going on their honeymoon a little later. Aaliyah was thrown by this request. She didn't really get why they'd do that, especially since she believed they could lift the Duke's curse after visiting the temple. And if that happened, they'd split up like they planned, so a trip was pointless. Trying to talk Aaliyah into agreeing, Cedric explained that it would make manipulating society easier later on. And it actually sounded pretty solid. Cedric confessed he used to be an orphan, taken in by a noble family. While he was attending classes for successors, he gave up his rights as the legitimate heir. After that, he got cursed. And even though he didn't get any compensation, he accepted his situation. Cedric kept working his butt off so his younger brother could become a great duke. And now, he's finally found his love and married her. and thanks to her, he can get rid of the curse. So if he can just enjoy a honeymoon after lifting the curse with his sweetheart, he can restore his reputation. And Aaliyah remembers incidents often happen around the Duke. And she figured, if it helps Cedric and Caleb, a little honeymoon isn't so bad. Then, with a satisfied smile, she agreed to go on a trip later. This made Cedric so happy, he even felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. So, Aaliyah was stressing, but the wedding actually went off without a hitch. A bunch of guests bailed early, but the rest stuck around for the evening shindig. Everyone was chowing down and congratulating the happy couple. Later, Caleb comes up to Aaliyah and asks if she's dog-tired after the whole day. She thanked him for asking and said she actually managed to chill out. But the kid wasn't ready to leave her alone, because he had something else to say. He was kind of fidgety, didn't know how to start, and Aaliyah started to worry about the little Duke. Then he just blurts out he's gonna go crash, and he'll tell her what's up later. Aaliyah tried to catch him, but she got swarmed by these aristocrat ladies who started congratulating her again. Those broads were totally digging her killer dress, but Aaliyah's eyes were glued on Caleb, who'd vanished the second she looked away. So she figured she'd definitely talk to him later. Come late evening, the girl felt like a walking corpse. She was so exhausted. She'd talked to more people in one night than she had in her entire previous life. But what bugged her most was what Caleb wanted to tell her. Finding a moment, Aaliyah went to look for him, but the maids told her the kid was already asleep. Now she was so bummed out that Olivia got really worried. Then she reminded Aaliyah that tonight was their wedding night, and for the first time, she asked her mistress to pull herself together, despite being tired. Last time, the thought of sharing a room with Cedric almost made Aaliyah choke. Right now, she couldn't even think straight. She felt like she'd pass out the second she hit the bed. But even if she had the energy, Aaliyah was sure she'd just be awkward, and nothing would happen anyway. That's when Olivia told her not to worry about a thing, that she'd take care of everything. Aaliyah wondered what Cedric was thinking. He'd been through a lot today too, and was probably already asleep. Actually, the Duke was in his room, a total bundle of nerves. He knew nothing was going to happen, that they'd just share the room, but it still messed with him. It's a tough situation for him, but you gotta understand where he's coming from. Cedric, trying to calm down a little, decided to down another glass of cold water, hoping it'd help. Meanwhile, Caleb was already out cold, deep in dreamland, and under his bed, something sinister was starting to take shape. Something the kid had no clue about. It was a quiet night, the full moon bathing the duchy in its light. Just as Cedric thought he could finally relax, Aaliyah's voice broke the silence. She apologized for being a little late, but the Duke assured her it was no problem. He noticed they had matching robes, and Aaliyah explained that Olivia had taken care of it, but they both looked exhausted and decided that it would be best to go to sleep quickly. Cedric gave Aaliyah his place on the bed and got ready to sleep on the couch, but she thought he'd be uncomfortable there, and that he should lie down on the soft bed too, especially since it was wide enough for both of them without getting in each other's way. Aaliyah lay down first, her body instantly melting into a state of relaxation. Before drifting off, she thought about how the fate they'd prepared for had turned into chaos, and the temple visit was now postponed. Tomorrow, the girl's life will continue in this palace, and she asked Cedric to take care of her, and watching his tired wife's eyelids close, he promised he'd do everything just right. Just as they expected, Aaliyah passed out pretty quickly, but the Duke was wide awake. Still, he felt good having the woman he loved next to him. He carefully brushed a strand of hair from her face so it wouldn't cover her eye. Like this, Aaliyah looked like she was carrying a really heavy burden. After a while, Aaliyah heard a noise like a wailing ambulance siren. Wasn't she just with Cedric? How'd she end up back in her old body, with doctors all around? Her brother Uni had gotten really sick. After examining him, the doctors decided he was an albino, but the girl declared he looked just like her. The kid's hair and eyes changed color because of the seizure, but then she heard someone call her Aaliyah again, and opening her eyes, she realized it was just a dream. Standing before her was the Duke, looking really stressed out, worried something had happened to her. Sitting up, the girl didn't even recognize where she was at first, and then she felt super dizzy, and if Cedric hadn't caught her, she would have passed out again. Just then, a maid knocked on their door, calling out to them in a panicked voice, explaining that something bad had happened to the young master. The couple bolted to the kids' room. Aaliyah especially was booking it. It felt like she was still dreaming, rushing to help her brother. When she burst into the room, the maids were all crowded around the boy's bed. Someone was yelling for warm water, and Aaliyah freaked out, not knowing what was happening to Caleb. They already sent for the doctor, but he wasn't here yet, and the maids were clueless. The kid was on the bed, looked like he was still asleep, but he was twisting like he was having seizures, groaning real bad. Aaliyah was still spaced out, thinking it was Yoon in front of her, and blaming herself for leaving him for a second. But then Cedric hugged her, telling her to calm down and promising he'd stay with Caleb. But she was like, she couldn't even hear him. It felt like he was a stranger to her. She felt totally alone without her mom and dad. Cedric kept stroking her face, trying to snap her out of it, and his care started to work. Aaliyah was completely back in reality and recognized her husband. Then she thanked him for bringing her back, even though she still felt a little dizzy. She decided to test Caleb, though. Wouldn't even listen to the maid. The girl hugged the boy, and he started to calm down a little in her arms. Holding him close, Aaliyah whispered that everything would be all right and begged him to calm down. She remembered how she calmed Uni during his fits and started doing the same thing with Caleb. The girl gently rocked him in her arms, like she was lulling him to sleep, and kept whispering that everything would be okay. And after a short while, the boy opened his eyes and realized that it was Aaliyah in front of him, who immediately rejoiced that his episode was over and that he would be all right now. The maids were watching the scene, totally mesmerized. Cedric didn't dare say a word yet either, but he was glad his brother was doing better. However, he was getting worried that Aaliyah kept repeating Uni's name every now and then, and he remembered her confession that whenever she looked at Caleb, her memories slowly came back. She said he looked a lot like someone who was very dear to her. Now, Cedric figured that the person Aaliyah was talking about was named Uni, and while they were all focused on Caleb's problem, nobody noticed something creepy hanging from the ceiling. The evil thing was hiding behind the chandelier, and you could only see its sinister grin if you looked closely. Later, Cedric returned to their room. He was going to be alone that night. Aaliyah wanted to stay with Caleb to make him feel more comfortable. She didn't want the Duke watching her brother's seizures. Explaining that she was used to dealing with them, Cedric realized that Caleb and Uni had merged into one for Aaliyah, and that she was taking care of some Uni. He hoped her memory was returning, but it seemed more like an unconscious action. Plus, if Aaliyah did remember, she'd be looking for Uni, and the Duke probably thinks he's gone for good. So Aaliyah's showering Caleb with love, because they're practically twins. That's when Cedric noticed he couldn't feel anything he was touching anymore, and he realized the curse was getting stronger. Aaliyah stayed with Caleb until morning, until the sun lit up the whole room. The kid didn't have any more attacks last night, which was a huge relief for her. But then she remembered sending Cedric to another room and got worried he might be freaking out. She definitely wasn't expecting to see her brother and Caleb again. Last life, tragedy just blindsided her family. Her parents died, the insurance money was stolen, and she was left with just 10 million won. She rented a room from them, staying with Uni, hoping the coach could help. She believed the only way to support her brother was to become a medalist. Luckily, she'd been called a prodigy since childhood. But to win, she had to leave 2-year-old Uni with the landlady. She turned away from him because it was hard enough just taking care of herself. And her coach suggested bringing her brother to the gym, but she didn't want to owe the guy. She didn't want to spill her family drama to her friends either. Then one day, she came back from practice and found Uni having a seizure. It happened while the landlady was out, and in that awful moment, she had only one thought. She was afraid that if her brother died, she'd be all alone. Now that seems insane. She was worried about being alone while her brother was struggling through a seizure. Under the bright light, Uni looked different. His hair turned white, and his light brown eyes went red. It was a rare disease that stripped pigment from the body, one that wasn't even recognized by the scientific community yet, but it led to death by starvation. And now, Aaliyah figured her being reborn into this world was a chance to atone for her sins. Later, the Duke was informed that Caleb had a slight cough, and Lady Aaliyah stayed up late with him. She was a little worn out after the incident, and now Edwin was asking if they'd be dining together. Cedric agreed, especially since he wanted to talk to his wife. Naturally, Caleb, who was already doing much better, would be dining with them too. The Duke decided to stop hiding things, and all that was left was to accept the situation. Edwin got curious about what the Lord was hiding and asked him to share it with him first. But the guy just blew him off, told him to mind his own business. Later, Cedric found out from his brother that he'd been having nightmares the whole time, and he couldn't figure out why Caleb hadn't said anything sooner. The kid was just thinking his episode last night might have been triggered by a nightmare, and these kinds of dreams have been messing with him ever since he got back to the duchy. The kid apologized for not saying anything right away. He just didn't want to worry anyone. Cedric also apologized to his brother for not noticing something was bugging him. Then they asked Caleb to tell them what he'd been dreaming about. And clenching his fists, he said that when he woke up, he couldn't remember anything. But recently, he started to remember stuff. And from his reaction, Aaliyah could tell it was rough on him. She told him not to talk if he couldn't, but the kid insisted he was feeling a lot better now. He was finally ready to tell his brother and Aaliyah about his dreams. Every time in his dream, Caleb stares, mesmerized, at a boundless ocean. But as he snaps out of it, a dark sea wave is already washing over his feet. The boy gets scared and starts to back away, but the wave rises lightning fast. giving him no chance to escape. His body feels like it's filled with lead, so heavy he can't move, and it gets harder and harder to breathe. And just when Caleb thinks he's doomed to drown forever, he suddenly wakes up. The boy's story sounded a little freaky, but it's just a dream, right? Except this time, the young Duke's nightmare was different. This time, as he sank into the dark, endless sea, something strange and sinister started approaching him. He couldn't exactly describe what it was, but it looked like a dark figure, with legs. When Aaliyah heard what was haunting the kid's dreams, something clicked. And since he couldn't explain it, he decided to draw the thing. Pretty soon, they all saw something like a huge black spider, massive compared to Caleb. Cedric was like, "That's weird, my brother's usually not scared of spiders." Olivia and even Edwin were freaked out by the drawing. They wouldn't want to see that in their dreams. Aaliyah remembered what could be covered in pitch black fur with legs bent at right angles. That's when Caleb admitted the creature wasn't trying to hurt him, just coming at him, all menacing. Still, he didn't get why he kept having these nightmares. His brother gave him props for being brave enough to spill the beans, knowing it was tough to remember. Aaliyah chimed in, giving him a pep talk, saying he was awesome for facing his fear and telling them everything. She always thought he was one brave kid. That's when he looked right at her, real serious, and asked if he could call her sis. Aaliyah thought it was weird. Up till now, he'd called her by her name, but he is the future Duke, after all. His position demanded it, but now it's different, because Aaliyah's part of the family. And since Caleb calls Cedric brother, he wanted to call Aaliyah sis. Besides, she used to let him call her that, so he was hoping she still wouldn't mind. Aaliyah was quiet for a few seconds, like she was thinking about something big. Then she just told him to call her Aaliyah, which threw him off. He didn't get why she was against it now. She explained that she was used to Caleb calling her by her name and didn't see any reason to switch things up. The kid agreed, looking a little bummed out, but you could tell his feelings were hurt. Cedric noticed his wife's face tense up for just a second there. Right then, they announced that the young master's law tutor had arrived. Time for his lesson, but Caleb wasn't exactly thrilled about going. An assistant approached Cedric, reminding him that he needed to head out to his scheduled event. But the Duke figured finding the source of his brother's nightmares was more important, and the kid promised to talk about it later. Agreeing with his brother, Cedric promised they'd all get together as soon as the event was over, and the boy went over to Aaliyah, promising to see her soon. He gave her a sweet smile, letting her know that he was okay for now. But she knew things weren't that simple, and she really wanted to help this kid. On the way to the event, Edwin asked Cedric why Aaliyah wouldn't let him call her sister. But then it hit him. The boss doesn't like him asking too many questions about the missus. Still, he was super curious. He kind of figured she'd go along with it too. Meanwhile, Cedric was thinking this whole decision had something to do with a guy named Yoonyi. Back at her place, Aaliyah got back, and Olivia noticed the missus looked kind of bummed out. The girl was worried her decision might have hurt Caleb's feelings, but the moment he asked her to call her sister, it felt like a jolt straight to her heart. She tried to picture the little Duke calling her that, and she wanted to let him. But after yesterday, she realized she was seeing Yoonyi in him. Something was off inside. She wanted to do for him what she couldn't do for her brother. But if Caleb called her sister, she'd see Yoonyi in him for the rest of her life. Aaliyah knew she couldn't keep doing this, because they were two completely different people. Trying to push aside all the extra thoughts, she wanted to see Caleb as his own person. Then she decided to check something out and planned to peek into the kid's room for a minute. Olivia was surprised by this sudden decision and asked if she could go with her ladyship, adding that the maids had already cleaned everything and there probably wasn't anything left after yesterday. But remembering the original story, Aaliyah was going to check something else entirely. The creature Caleb saw in his nightmares appeared when he cursed the world after Cedric died. It gave the boy power in exchange for eating his dreams. The great demon, Mephisto. And if it really was him, Aaliyah wanted to find out why he'd shown up now, of all times. Cedric headed to the temple, where he was supposed to undergo a ritual of sworn allegiance. After this, he'll be a full-fledged member of the Indigencia family. This noble ritual is basically a curse, because if he betrays the family, darkness will eat him alive. That's why most people turn down the ritual, but Cedric agreed to go through with it. Edwin was by his side, and the Duke gave him another assignment afterwards. Sounded kinda weird for an assistant, but the boss wanted him to find out who Yoonyi is, and Cedric explained to him that Yoonyi is someone who's really important to Aaliyah. He couldn't ask her directly, so he ordered his assistant to find out who this guy is. All the Duke knew was the name, nothing else. Not even if it was a guy or girl, or how old they were. But he suspected it might be a little boy, and that he's his wife's brother. Edwin had to figure it all out, and he had to do it quietly. Meanwhile, Aaliyah was already in Caleb's room, peering under the bed. Olivia was a little thrown by her mistress's behavior, not understanding what she was doing. But the Duchess herself didn't know what she was looking for, and just decided to look around. There wasn't any creature under the bed, but that's where it lived in the original story. Aaliyah wanted to sort this out quickly, otherwise the boy might suffer from nightmares again. Mephisto devours the dreams of those who made a deal with him, and after that, they start having nightmares. In the original, Caleb became more sensitive because of it, and while he was in class, Aaliyah wanted to figure everything out, but then her gaze fell on the ceiling, where she noticed something terrifying, with 9 slanted eyes above the chandelier. Olivia didn't notice anything, but she was scared by the look on her mistress's face at that moment. What Aaliyah wanted to know was why the hell Mephisto was living on the chandelier. As soon as the demon realized he'd been spotted, he started swinging from the chandelier like a maniac. The clueless maid was standing right underneath him, and Aaliyah was scared for her life. She barely managed to shove Olivia out of the way. Just then, the chandelier crashed to the floor, shattering into a million pieces with dark energy swirling all around. The maid was scared stiff, totally lost on what to do. Suddenly, the room lit up with a bright glow, and a magic shield appeared in midair. Cedric also popped into the room out of nowhere, instantly pulling his wife close to protect her. Then he explained he'd sensed the danger and teleported over right away. She thanked him, and it finally hit her that Cedric was the most powerful mage in the world. Mephisto was still hanging up by the ceiling, and Aaliyah decided she was taking him alive. But she was totally blown away when she realized her husband knew this demon. Cedric ripped into him for putting his brother and wife in danger. While Aaliyah was starting to freak out a little, the Duke knew he had to capture this thing alive, and he had to do it fast, before Olivia saw it. Cedric trapped it inside a magic bubble. Now it looked like a soap bubble, but it hid him from everyone else's view. Olivia was worried about the chandelier falling, thinking it was her fault, but Aaliyah told her to chill, explaining it was just an accident, and she was totally fine. The maid still wanted to check for injuries on the lady, and that's when Caleb walked in. Right behind him came Edwin, totally winded, who'd run over to see if the master was okay. When Cedric teleported, he left his assistant all alone in that temple. Caleb noticed the busted chandelier and asked what the heck happened. They told him they'd caught the source of all his nightmares, and that the source was the great demon Mephisto, the Lord of Lies himself. Cedric was laying all this out, while Caleb and Aaliyah listened intently. But then it hit her. How does her husband know about this? He's never seen him before. Meanwhile, Caleb started checking out the bubble, amazed there was a demon inside. From his reaction, Aaliyah figured out the kid already knew Mephisto existed. But then, he picked up the bubble and was all surprised that it could be the Sage of Indigence. Those words completely floored Aaliyah. She couldn't believe that the great demon who gave Caleb his power was a sage and protector of their family. The Duke explained that those who undergo the ritual kind of merge with the indigents. It gives them a sharper sense of what's going on in the whole duchy. That's why Cedric instantly felt his wife was in danger and teleported right to her, leaving Edwin standing there, totally clueless about what just happened. Appearing in his brother's room, the Duke shielded Aaliyah from the chandelier debris that had fallen on her. He also knew right away who he was facing, a sage controlled by the indigents, the great demon Mephisto, Lord of Deception. Now, Aaliyah was curious why Cedric would treat Mephisto like that if he knew he was a sage. But the Duke couldn't ignore that the demon dared to endanger a member of his family. At that moment, his words sounded incredibly touching to her. She didn't want Cedric putting himself in danger, though, and told him not to do it again. Cedric explained that the Indigentia family got their title through marriage to the Imperial family, and their lineage went way back. Way back in the day, the Elephanium Empire, the Fairy Kingdom, ruled the world. Wars with other races were constant, just a regular thing that went on forever. And one time, during a war with the dwarves, something happened. While Cedric was talking, his brother was drawing pictures to help Aaliyah understand. The Duke continued, saying the dwarves had great weapons, but their command skills sucked. They couldn't beat the fairies and humans. So, they looked for other ways and summoned a demon from the underworld to borrow its intelligence. In Caleb's drawing, it actually looked kind of funny. So, the royal family wanted to screw over the dwarves somehow, stop them from winning. And the Indigenzia family was going to be their muscle in doing that. Gravity magic's considered the strongest, so it was perfect for kicking demon ass. But even gravity magic was no match for the demon's raw power. And just before the wizard got crushed, the demon offered a deal. They could contain him, right? So he asked them to teach him gravity magic, and he'd promised not to hurt them. The demon swore their powers would level up big time if they took the offer. And that demon was Mephisto. The Indigencia family teamed up with him to avoid getting wiped out, hiding it from the royals. They couldn't let anyone know that the knights sent to conquer the demon had become his servants. But rumors started flying that the Indigencia family made a deal with a demon. That's why they made Mephisto the family's sage, and he helped them perfect their magic. Now, Aaliyah understood what was up. Remembering how Mephisto often trained Caleb in the novel, But the details she just heard weren't in the original story. In the book, the demon was powerful and badass, but now he's chilling in a soap bubble. And like this, he looks more like a cotton ball. Suddenly, it turned out Mephisto could hear everything and wasn't happy about being talked about like that. The bubble immediately popped, and he demanded an apology for being called a cotton ball. But Caleb wasn't about to apologize for his words. He was the one who called him that, and explained that even though Mephisto was a sage, he still created problems for the future Archduke. The demon just shriveled up like a scared kitten and admitted he was just super hungry. Deciding to step in, Aaliyah explained that the sage should have talked to the kid first. The demon didn't like some woman talking down to him like that, but Cedric immediately shut him up. She's his wife, after all. Still, Mephisto was pissed that some people were ordering around him. A nine-eyed sage. Aaliyah remembered that, in the original stories, the number 9 was considered the greatest. It was also tied to the fact that there could only be 9 magic circles. That's why Mephisto was bragging, since demons naturally have one eye for each circle. Even so, Aaliyah didn't appreciate this creature talking to her with that attitude. She glared at him like some kid who just screwed up. The demon didn't seem to want to admit any fault, and started grumbling back, which was different from how he acted in the original story. Mephisto just blurts out that Aaliyah's making him starving and calls her a bad woman. What really threw her was Mephisto seeing her as a fairy and demanding to know why she's hanging around him. I mean, fairies and demons are total opposites. Then he starts poking her with his claw, demanding she gets kicked out. And Aaliyah realizes that Cedric and Caleb still haven't figured out she's a fairy. Now, she's scrambling to figure out how to defuse this situation before this creature causes her even more trouble. Her options were to play dumb or remind everyone about her amnesia. She had to think fast. But then the kid grabs this furry furball. He glares at the sage and explains that he's been holding back because his brother and Aaliyah are here. And he demands an explanation for why Mephisto's talking trash about her like that. He dropped his voice, made it all gravelly, and declared that thing had no right to call Aaliyah just some woman. She tried to calm the kid down, telling him she was okay, but Caleb didn't get why she was stopping him. Mephisto deserved to get his ass kicked now. I mean, he was disrespecting the Duchess, and the young Archduke wasn't about to let that slide. Aaliyah was at a loss for words. She didn't know what to say, because sometimes, when Caleb shows this other side of himself, she remembers him as that secretive villain. But the Caleb she knows now is totally different. And if Aaliyah can lift the curse on Cedric, he won't have to become a bad guy. That's when Cedric stepped in, asking his brother to listen to Aaliyah and chill out. The kid agreed and let Mephisto go, and the little dude jumped onto the Duke's shoulder, hiding behind him. This whole thing was getting weirder and weirder. So then, Caleb confessed that the demon started it, tormenting him with nightmares. And now, he's just being a straight-up jerk. No wonder the kid's in a bad mood, and the demon's not even gonna apologize. Out of nowhere, Aaliyah suggests just smacking some sense into the thing, so it learns how to behave. Caleb was totally down with that idea, even suggesting 3 good smacks. Even Cedric agreed that a little lesson like that would do Mephisto some good. And then, trying to dodge getting hit, he admitted he knew another way to the Temple of Knowledge. Everyone immediately turned their attention to the demon and demanded details, but he asked them to sit down first and promised they wouldn't beat him up. Then, he explained that this path to the temple was different from the one that's currently blocked. Most people think there's only one way in, but there are actually other ways to get there. Aaliyah was surprised there were more than one. She only knew about the one Daphne used. Caleb reminded the wise man that the sanctuary was a dragon's lair, befriended by the first emperor. And he didn't argue, adding that there's more to this world than just humans. The Duke realized minorities also knew the path to the Temple of Knowledge, which was news to him. There really are other races with their own societies in Aegean. One of them is the fairies, which is what Aaliyah is. Then there are the dwarves, who Caleb explained with drawings. Also, there were a few dragons and their descendants, the dragon race. This is a world where humans, fairies, dwarves, and the dragon race exist. But originally, it only mentioned humans and fairies. Caleb figured he needed to meet with the minorities now, but they probably aren't feeling too friendly. Mephisto didn't see what the big deal was, since they could just head to the fairies, even though people say they're practically all extinct. I mean, 200 years ago, when a Priscent started that rebellion, a ton of pureblood fairies got wiped out. Still, half-bloods and their descendants can still walk among humans. At that, the Duke glanced at Aaliyah, and she got freaked out that he thought she was a half-breed. I mean, she does have pink hair, and those jewel-like eyes that only fairies have. Then, Aaliyah started wondering if everything would be okay if she ran into other fairies while looking for the minority. That's when Mephisto piped up, trying to say there was a pureblood fairy right in front of the Dukes. But before he could finish, the girl grabbed him and squashed him like a beanbag. She acted like he was just annoying her with his grumbling, especially since this wasn't the time to dilly-dally. We gotta get to that temple Asape, which means finding the minority group, like, now. Later that night, they brought the Virabayam newspaper to the Empress. Her Majesty, Lanelica y Presente, told her maid to leave it on the table and get out. She was pissed, because she had no freaking clue why he wasn't coming to see her. And right there on the front page of the paper was a picture of Cedric and Aaliyah, all happy and cozy. The Empress was way more focused on the Duke's face, though, and she was racking her brain, trying to figure out what the hell else she could do to get him to come to her.